Chapter 10:13. Chu Xiaoying thought for a moment then asked, "Prince, is this all true?" Even someone like Chu Xiaoying would never have guessed that Mo Jingli had so many shameful things in private. Most importantly, even if he did, he couldn't let his enemies have a handle on him. Mo Shuyao nodded leisurely. Mr. Chu doesn't believe in the ability of Qi Lin and the Mahist army's shadow guard to gather intelligence? Chu Xiaoying quickly shook his head. I just don't understand why Prince didn't reveal these things earlier. Also, if Prince personally announced these things to the world or if someone from the Su family released them, the impact would be greater, right? Mo Shuyao shook his head and said, in the past it wasn't the right time. Now, the Su family is far less convenient than the Chu family. Of course, Mr. Chu doesn't have to do this himself. Chu Xiaoying pondered for a moment, then understood the whole story. After all, the Su family was part of the Prince Ding mansion. Although the Su family members were all people of virtue and prestige, Mo Jingli could turn the tables and accuse the Prince Ding mansion of slandering him. But if someone else revealed these things, it would be completely different. Of course, in Chu Xiaoying's opinion, part of the reason was that Prince Ding didn't want the Su family to be involved in these things. No matter what, many secrets of De Chu state had been revealed. They were still subjects of De Chu state after all. Once these things were revealed, Mo Jingli's reputation would be ruined. But it was inevitable that they would be criticized by some sour scholars. I understand. Prince, don't worry. I will definitely choose an appropriate time to reveal these things to the world. After hearing Chu Xiaoying's words, Mo Shuyao was very satisfied. He stood up and smiled. In that case, I will wait for Mr. Chu's good news. Chu Xiaoying nodded and said, Prince, don't worry. Mo Shuyao left the Chu family, then quickly leaped over the city wall and left the city. Even though Liang City was heavily guarded, it still couldn't stop Prince Ding, who was dressed in a flamboyant white robe. After leaving Liang City, Su Qingfeng and a few Qilin team members were already waiting there. Mo Shuyao raised his eyebrows. What are you doing here? Su Qingfeng smiled helplessly. He had just returned to the camp when he found out that Mo Shuyao was still alive, and had even appeared in the camp. When the news of Mo Xuyao's death first came, Su Qingfeng was almost scared out of his wits. His mind was filled with thoughts of what would happen to his cousin if Mo Xuyao really died. It wasn't easy for him to survive, but he ran away before he even saw him. Su Qingfeng almost thought that Lu Jingxian and the others were joking with him. After waiting in the camp for a long time, Mo Xuyao still didn't return. Su Qingfeng could only wait outside Liang City with his men. When it was almost dawn and Su Qingfeng was about to charge into Liang City again, Mo Shuyao finally appeared. Prince, are you all right? Mo Shuyao raised his eyebrows. What could be wrong with him? Su Qingfeng sighed and nodded. It's good that you're fine. He didn't wait for Mo Xuyao's reaction and turned to leave. Mo Xuyao, who had always been quick-witted, couldn't help but be stunned. Su Qingfeng waited here in the middle of the night just to make sure that he was fine? Was he worried about him? Aside from official matters, the brothers of the Su family had never been so friendly to him. In front, Su Qingfeng walked in the direction of the camp while muttering to himself. It's good that he didn't die. If he really did die, I'll have to help Lear find a husband. Lear is fine, but my nephews and nieces are pitiful. The next morning, Mo Jingli's attendants saw that it was already quite late, but the emperor still hadn't called anyone in. Even Consort Li didn't seem to have any intention of getting up. They couldn't help but feel strange. They waited and waited until a general came to report the situation. There was still no movement inside. They could only carefully walk in to ask Mo Jingli to get up. However, as soon as they walked in, before they could wake the person on the bed, the attendant let out a sharp scream. The eunuch's unique scream was very high-pitched and ear-piercing. Not only were the people waiting outside shocked and rushed in, Mo Jingli, who had been lying unconscious on the bed, was also startled awake. Being woken up, Mo Jingli frowned in displeasure. Lowering his head, he saw the woman in his arms, her icy temperature and already stiff body, as well as the dark red blood by her lips. All of this told Mo Jingli one thing. Last night he had hugged a dead person and slept the entire night. More importantly, last night, someone had snuck in to kill Consort Li and he didn't know anything about it. If the other person wanted to kill him, Mo Jingli couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. Sitting up, he pushed away Consort Li's corpse. Mo Jingli roared angrily, Why aren't you moving her away yet? Your Majesty. The attendant trembled as he pointed at a certain part of his body. Following the attendant's line of sight, all of the people who had rushed in couldn't help but look at Emo Jingli's lower body. The area under the originally bright yellow inner robe was also dyed with dark red blood. Emo Jingli's expression suddenly twisted. He finally felt that something wasn't right. There was a certain part of his body that he couldn't feel at all. It wasn't pain, so he hadn't noticed it from the start. He couldn't feel anything at all, as if it didn't exist. Quick! Call the imperial physician. Emo Jingli roared angrily. Your Majesty, there is a piece of paper here. The attendant trembled as he picked up a piece of paper from the table and presented it to Emo Jingli. Emo Jingli grabbed it. It was a very normal piece of paper, like a page that he had casually torn out of a book that he usually used. There were only a few words written on it. Hearing that you stole my treasure, I was worried all day and night. Reflecting, I cut off your sins to end my worries. I hope that you will take good care of yourself. Staring at the unrestrained handwriting, Emo Jingli's eyes widened. Finally, he couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. His eyes rolled back and he fainted. Your Majesty. Your Majesty. Quick! Call the imperial physician. Chapter 10:14. On this day in the governor's manor of Liang City, where the Dechu state's emperor was temporarily staying, something that would shock the heavens and earth happened. However, the people who knew about this would not speak of it because a portion of them had already been killed by Emo Jingli. The ones that could not be killed were Emo Jingli's trusted aides and did not have the courage to do so. Everyone in Liang City, from the nobles to the commoners, did not know what had happened. The only thing they knew was that the Dechu army's rations had been burned by the Mahist army last night. In Emo Jingli's room, several imperial physicians were kneeling on the ground, trembling and not daring to move. Emo Jingli sat on the bed and coldly stared at the people below him. His face was twisted and ferocious, like a storm was coming. Tell me, can it be cured? After a long time, Emo Jingli coldly asked. The room was silent for a long time before an imperial physician said in a trembling voice, reporting to the emperor, the assassin was too heavy-handed. Also, he was drugged. This subject is useless, there is nothing we can do. A trace of killing intent flashed across Emo Jingli's face. He sneered and said, take him out and kill him. Since you are useless, why are you still alive? 2 guards came in and dragged out the imperial physician who had just spoken. The imperial physician cried out in fear, Emperor, have mercy. Emperor, have mercy. It was a pity that Emo Jingli did not have any intention of paying attention to him. Instead, he stared at the remaining imperial physicians kneeling by the bed and asked, what do you say? The imperial physicians had long been frightened out of their wits by Emo Jingli's cold-blooded methods. They hurriedly said, we will definitely do our best. Your Majesty, please spare our lives. Do your best? Emo Jingli was dissatisfied. The imperial physicians hurriedly changed their words. We will definitely create an antidote. We will definitely cure your Majesty, definitely. Who cared about the crime of deceiving the monarch right now? If they lied to the emperor, they would die later. If they did not lie to the emperor, they would die immediately. All the imperial physicians hurriedly guaranteed, as if someone had not been cut in a place that should not have been cut. Instead, it was as if he had accidentally cut his hand. Emo Jingli narrowed his eyes and said coldly, I will give you 3 days. Yes. The imperial physicians all heaved a sigh of relief and hurriedly agreed. Looking at these imperial physicians who were as frightened as cicadas in winter, Emo Jingli coldly snorted and said, get out. The imperial physicians scrambled out of the room to study the prescription. They knew in their hearts that the person who had stabbed Emo Jingli was clearly trying to sever his roots, not to mention whether or not they could develop an antidote. Even if Xin Yang, who was known as the godly doctor of the present age, came with the biluo grass, it was useless. After all, humans were not garlic sprouts that could grow back after being pinched off. However, none of them dared to speak the truth. After all, the example of the past was right in front of them. At this moment, these imperial physicians could not help but hope in their hearts that the Mahist army would quickly break through Liang so that they could escape. In the room, Emo Jingli leaned against the head of the bed and stared at the letter in his hand that he had already read countless times. The expression in his eyes kept changing. This old official Qiu Yunan requests an audience with the emperor. Outside the door a somewhat old voice sounded. Mo Jingli said in a low voice, "Come in." An old man around 60 years old dressed as a scholar walked in. Looking at the person on the bed, he carefully lowered his head and bowed. "What orders does the emperor have for summoning me?" Mo Jingli stared at him for a while before asking, "Lord Qiu, you can be considered an old official of 4 dynasties, right?" Lord Qiu quickly said, replying to the emperor, "This old official has been an official since the time of the previous emperor. It was a pity that his fate was not good. His ability was average, his appearance was average, and his family background was also average. Thus he was still unknown after 4 dynasties. However, at least he knew how to conduct himself normally. These years he had lived peacefully. Now those with ability in Dechu State's court had either died or left. It was only now that he barely had a chance to make a name for himself. However, Mo Jingli still did not think highly of him. It was only out of helplessness that he promoted him because there was no one else he could use. Mo Jingli raised his hand and handed over the letter in his hand, saying, "Then take a look. Do you recognize this handwriting?" Lord Qiu carefully took the letter and looked. He paused at the contents of the letter. However, he quickly detected Mo Jingli's cold gaze and quickly focused his attention on the handwriting. He furrowed his brow and shook his head after a while, saying, replying to the emperor, "This old official does not recognize this handwriting." Mo Jingli laughed coldly and said, "Is that so? Doesn't it look familiar?" "Familiar?" Lord Qiu looked back at the letter in confusion. This time he really did see something. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "This, Emperor, this handwriting seems to be from Suzhi, is that right?" Mo Jingli asked coldly. Back then Suzhi was not only the greatest scholar in Dechu State, second only to Master Qingyun. He was also a famous calligrapher. There were as many people who wanted to be his disciple as there were hairs on a cow. However, there were only 2 people who had the opportunity to be taught by Suzhi from the beginning. Lord Qiu nodded and said, "That's right. However, this person's handwriting is very different from Master Suzhi's. Suzhi's handwriting is elegant and has the elegance and pride of a scholar. However, this person's handwriting is more carefree and domineering. It's not hard to imagine, but if you look closely there are traces of Suzhi's handwriting. Therefore this person should have been taught by Suzhi from a young age. Learning from a young age was a habit that had been carved into one's bones. Even when it became independent later on, there were still traces to be found." Mo Jingli threw out another booklet and asked, "Did these 2 handwriting come from the same person?" Lord Qiu opened it and almost fell to the ground in fright when he saw it. This booklet was written by Prince Ding. Although Mo Shuyao was not a famous calligrapher, because of his status and reputation his handwriting would occasionally be found outside. It was even more valuable than the handwriting of many famous calligraphers. Lord Qiu had been an official in court for 30 to 40 years. Naturally he had seen it before. But, wasn't Prince Ding already dead? Looking at Mo Jingli in fright, Lord Qiu even forgot his proper etiquette. He wondered if the emperor had gone mad from anger because of what had happened last night. Seeing Lord Qiu's shocked expression, Mo Jingli's expression became even uglier. Did he like being suspected as a madman? He held the letter and compared it for a long time. However, the person who had left the letter seemed to have done it on purpose. The handwriting on the letter was 70% similar to Mo Xuyao's, but also 30% different. It was as if the person had purposely written it to look right but not right. If Mo Xuyao really hadn't died and wanted to change the identity of his handwriting, then there was no need for him to write a letter with his handwriting. He could have just thought of a way to cover up his handwriting. But now, Mo Jingli couldn't help but wonder if Mo Xuyao really hadn't died. But if this was a trick by the Mahist army, then he would lose face in front of the entire world again. At that time, everyone would know that he, Mo Jingli, was afraid of Mo Xuyao. Even if Mo Xuyao had died he was still afraid of him. Is it true or not? Mo Jingli asked coldly. Chapter 10:15. Lord Qiu said with a bitter expression, "Your Majesty, even though the 2 characters are similar, I'm afraid they aren't written by the same person. But Prince Ding is already dead." "Leave." Mo Jingli said in an exasperated tone. "Yes, this old official will leave." Lord Qiu hurriedly left as if he had been pardoned. Mo Xiao. Must be you. Emo Jingli said through gritted teeth. He suddenly wanted to get up, but he accidentally pulled on his wound. His face paled and he almost fainted again. He didn't know what medicine Emo Shuyao had used, but he didn't feel any pain at first. Not long after he woke up, he began to feel pain and it became more and more painful. Emo Jingli fiercely squeezed the letter in his hand. Emo Shuyao. Zhen will definitely kill you. Zhen will definitely kill you. Emo Jingli really wanted to send out all of his people to search for Emo Shuyao's whereabouts. Then, no matter if he was really dead or not, he would kill him again. However, other people didn't see it this way, including Emo Jingli's confidants. The entire world knew that Prince Ding was dead, and it was personally confirmed by the Emperor and Genom of Gojoseon. How could he come back from the dead? As for the time when no one discovered that he had entered the governor's manor, since Qi Lin was able to silently reduce the Chu army's food, then it was very possible that he had snuck into the governor's manor. Most people thought that this was a provocation and warning from the Maoist army's Chu army. As for Emo Jingli believing that Emo Shuyao was still alive, it must be that the emperor was too nervous. Even though Emo Jingli really wanted to prove that he was right, he also knew that Lei Jinting had personally seen Emo Shuyao's corpse that day. Lei Jinting had no reason to lie to him about this. Also, he didn't have the face to take out the letter left by the assassin for everyone to see. Wouldn't that mean that everyone in the world would know about his injuries? If it was Prince Ding's, then there was no need to hide his identity. Why would he change his handwriting? If he wanted to change his handwriting, then why did he have to look 70% like Prince Ding's? This is clearly a trap set by the Maoist army. If he really didn't want people to recognize him, then no one would be able to help him write it. Even if he wrote it with his left hand. In the end, his subordinates' words finally convinced Emo Jingli, or it could be said that Emo Jingli had convinced himself. He could only send people to increase the security. Emo Jingli's heart was extremely gloomy as he hid in the governor's mansion to recuperate. Emo Shuyao still had an ordinary appearance as he mingled with the Maoist army. Apart from Leng Huai and the others, no one in the Maoist army knew that the deceased Prince Ding was sitting in their camp and drinking tea. Even though Emo Shuyao had changed his appearance, everyone in the tent could still feel that the prince was in a very good mood. Compared to Emo Shuyao, who had just arrived at the camp yesterday, it was obvious that the prince had done something to make him very happy. Prince, did something good happen? Lu Jingxian asked curiously. Even though everyone else seemed to be busy with their own matters, their ears perked up. Emo Shuyao said leisurely, Yunzhou's 6 major aristocratic families have all agreed to submit to the Prince Ding mansion. Is this considered a good thing? Everyone had a disapproving look on their faces. How could this be considered a good thing? None of them felt that any idiotic aristocratic family head would submit to Emo Jingli unless he had no other choice. Between Emo Jingli and the Prince Ding mansion, it was obvious that the Prince Ding mansion had a much greater advantage. If it was Emo Jingqi, he could still stand in a righteous position. If it was Emo Jingli who had usurped the throne and killed his brothers and nephews, he would not even be able to keep this last bit of status. Emo Shuyao said with a smile, as for other things, Buddha says, can't say. As soon as he thought of Emo Jingli's current appearance, Emo Shuyao felt that the gloominess of these days was swept away. Last night she had resisted the urge to kill Emo Jingli and let him live. That was the right decision. Thinking, Emo Shuyao raised an eyebrow and said, General Lu, can you take Liang in 3 days? Lu Jingxian said with a smile, Prince, don't worry, there definitely won't be a problem. The Chu army's troop transporting the supplies is almost here. They will arrive by tonight at the latest. When the time comes we can act. Emo Shuyao raised an eyebrow and said, You plan on attacking when the Dechu state's troop transporting the supplies arrives? Lu Jingxian nodded. He had indeed planned on doing so. Also, Wang Fei had already given orders before she left. Half of the Jiangnan merchants that provided the supplies to the Chu army were people from the Prince Ding mansion. Those supplies were to be given to the Maoist army. Naturally, Emo Jingli couldn't get them. Emo Shuyao thought for a moment and then shook his head. No, let them in. Lu Jingxian looked at Emo Shuyao in confusion. Prince's meaning is? Emo Shuyao said, send people to help them transport the supplies in. Taking out a small and delicate porcelain bottle and putting it on the table, Emo Shuyao said lightly, Do you know what to do? Prince is talking about poisoning? I'm afraid that's not very safe. Leng Huai said with some worry. After all, there were hundreds of thousands of soldiers and horses. It was impossible for all of them to be poisoned at the same time. As long as one was discovered first, it was very likely that all their efforts would be for naught. Mo Shuyao said lightly, "Don't worry, I took this from Shenyang. After taking it, it will take 2 hours for it to take effect. Also, this thing isn't fatal. It will only make them temporarily lose the strength to fight. I also don't want to kill too many people." Su Qingfeng. "Subordinate is here." Su Qingfeng stood up and replied. Mo Shuyao took out a piece of paper and said lightly, "Within 3 hours after the supplies enter the city, I want to see the heads of these people." Su Qingfeng took it in his hand, glanced at it and memorized it. He nodded and said, "Subordinate obeys. Subordinate will immediately arrange it." Mo Shuyao nodded and said, "You entered the city once before and have already alerted the Chu army. I think the security will be even tighter. Be careful." "Yes, Prince." Su Qingfeng nodded and turned to leave. Inside the tent, Su said, "Prince is planning to kill the Chu army's generals first? As long as the generals leading the army died, no matter how many soldiers there were, they were just a bunch of headless flies. In addition, if most of the soldiers lost their ability to fight, the Maoist army might be able to take down Shuiyang City without shedding a drop of blood." Leng Huai raised his eyebrows and hesitated before saying, "Prince is planning to take in the 800,000 Chu army?" Hearing this, everyone was shocked. Mo Shuyao nodded with satisfaction and said with a smile, "General Leng is right. Enchanting definitely wouldn't think that his original allies would suddenly turn around and attack him." "Prince, good plan." Lu Jingxian also praised. If it succeeded, it would be enough to deal a fatal blow to Enchanting. However, this plan, other than Mo Shuyao, could not be realized by anyone else. Even if Lu Jingxian and the others could take down Liang City without shedding a drop of blood, Lu Jingxian and Leng Huai's prestige was not enough to take in 800,000 soldiers at once. Thus, they had never thought of this method and did not dare to think of it. When night fell again, the Chu army's army had already arrived in front of Liang City. To the Chu army, who had just lost almost all of their provisions, this was naturally good news. After a series of checks, the army transporting the provisions successfully entered Liang City. Mo Jingli, who was currently lying on the bed, was not in the mood to care about these trivial matters. He waved his hand and ordered his subordinates to do it. However, he did not know that the Jiangnan merchants in charge of preparing the provisions, represented by Zhang Baiwan, were currently in the Maoist army's camp as guests. Chapter 10:16. Greetings to General Lu, General Leng. Zhang Baiwan saw Lu Jingxian and Leng Huai sitting at the head of the table. He shrunk his neck and cupped his hands in greeting. Although he was desperate for money, this was the first time he had faced soldiers with killing intent like Lu Jingxian and the others. As for the generals he had seen in Nanjing, compared to Lu Jingxian and the others, they were not worth mentioning. Lu Jingxian smiled and said, "Lord Zhang, there is no need to be so polite. This matter is all thanks to Lord Zhang." Zhang Baiwan repeatedly waved his hand and said, I don't dare. "General, just call me Zhang Baiwan. Since it is Princess Ding's order, how can I not obey? General, rest assured, after today this one promises that Mo Jingli will not be able to transport half a grain of grain from Jiangnan." Lu Jingxian nodded with satisfaction. Seeing that Zhang Baiwan was still somewhat nervous, he smiled and comforted him. "Lord Zhang, rest assured, the princess has already made arrangements. This general promises that even if the news of you relying on the Prince Ding mansion spreads to Jiangnan, your family will not be in any danger." Zhang Baiwan's eyes lit up. They were most worried about being discovered by Mo Jingli. After all, their roots were still in Jiangnan and Mo Jingli still had the final say in Jiangnan. "Lord Zhang, there is a matter that requires you to return to Jiangnan. I don't know if it is possible." Mo Shuyao, who had been sitting on the side without speaking, suddenly opened his mouth. In order to hide his whereabouts, Mo Shuyao had always disguised himself in the army. She didn't have that obvious white hair and she had an ordinary face. Even if his aura was shocking, it was difficult for people to associate him with the deceased Prince Ding. Zhang Baiwan hesitated for a moment. He looked at Lu Jingxian and said, Lu Jingxian said, "This is Yi." Although Zhang Baiwan didn't know who Yi was, he at least remembered that Princess Ding's surname was Yi. Now that Prince Ding was gone, wasn't Princess Ding in charge of the Prince Ding mansion? Moreover, judging from Lu Jingxian's attitude, he knew that he could not afford to offend this person. He hurriedly said respectfully, "Young master, please instruct me." Mo Shuyao took out a letter and handed it to Zhang Baiwan. "Please take this letter back and deliver it to the person on the envelope." Zhang Baiwan was stunned. He said with some suspicion, "That's it?" Originally he thought it was something important. He didn't expect that it was just a simple letter. Anyone could do this kind of thing. This he had specifically asked him to deliver the letter, so he couldn't help but feel a trace of suspicion. Mo Shuyao smiled faintly. "Lord Zhang, there is no need to hesitate. It is indeed just a letter." Originally, it didn't matter who delivered the letter, but after the Prince Ding Mansion's people entered Jiangnan, it would be easy to attract attention, so I wanted to trouble you to make a trip. This wasn't a big deal, so Zhang Baiwan naturally wouldn't refuse. Putting away the letter, he nodded and said, "Young master, please don't worry. I will definitely deliver the letter." Mo Shuyao nodded with satisfaction and said with a smile, "Lord Zhang only needs to deliver the letter. I can guarantee on behalf of the princess that the Zhang family will not be mistreated in the future." Zhang Baiwan was overjoyed. He looked at Lu Jingxian and the others who all had normal expressions. It seemed that this he really did have the ability to make decisions on behalf of Princess Ding. The smile on his face deepened. He nodded and said, "Young master, please don't worry." After sending off Zhang Baiwan, Leng Huai frowned and said, "Prince, this Zhang Baiwan is too greedy. I'm afraid he's not that reliable." Mo Shuyao raised his eyebrows and smiled. Li Li chose him to work with and not anyone else. This proves that he is indeed worth it. And being greedy isn't a bad thing. People die in pursuit of wealth and birds die in pursuit of food. If he really has the ability, I don't mind letting him take a bit more. But if he went too far, he couldn't guarantee that he wouldn't make him spit out all his family's wealth. But, according to the news we received, this person also has some unclear relationship with the West Hill. Leng Huai frowned. In the letter that Princess Ding left behind before she left, she said that this person could not be completely trusted. Mo Shuyao was not surprised and said with a smile, "He is a businessman. Naturally, he won't put all his eggs in the same basket." "What did the prince write in the letter to him?" Yun Ting asked curiously. Mo Shuyao said, "It said, Prince Ding is not dead yet. He is now seriously injured and on the verge of death. He wants the shadow guard hidden in the Prince Ding mansion in Jiangnan to go to Nanzhao to borrow troops to save Princess Ding from being trapped in Feihong Pass." Everyone was confused. Ask Nanzhao to borrow troops? Their situation wasn't that bad, was it? Furthermore, Nanzhao had just had internal strife for a few years and had been entangled with Xiling for a while. Even if they used all the power of the country, how many troops could they borrow? After thinking for a moment, He Su said, "The prince suspects that Zhang Baiwan is one of Lei Zhenting's people? If Zhang Baiwan really was one of Lei Zhenting's people, he would definitely not return to Jiangnan after receiving this letter. He would send it directly to Lei Zhenting's hands." Mo Shuyao shook his head and said, "Right now he is definitely not one of Lei Zhenting's people. But after he reads this letter, it is not certain." Everyone looked at each other. Only now did they understand that this was a test from the prince to the wealthy Jiangnan merchants led by Zhang Baiwan. If they chose wrongly, Yun Ting furrowed his brows and said, "Isn't this too? After all, perhaps Zhang Baiwan does not have such thoughts right now. Purposely stirring up other people's disloyalty, although a large part of this was due to these people's weak minds. Originally, most of the people in this world were ordinary people with weak minds. As long as they were not given a chance, perhaps they would never betray." Mo Shuyao said lightly, "Jiangnan will change very quickly. At that time, these people will become very important. Rather than having these wavering people ruinize matters, I would rather get rid of them all and replace them with people who will not have disloyalty." Perhaps such a method was somewhat cruel, but Mo Shuyao had too many things to consider. He was responsible for the entire Prince Ding mansion and the rise and fall of the Mahist army. He did not have the energy to care about the life and death of individuals and whether they were innocent or not. What's more, didn't he leave them with a chance? Glancing at Mo Shuyao's cold gaze, Yun Ting sighed in his heart and said no more. He understood Prince Ding's meaning. Compared to these old Mahist army people who had experienced many things, he was clearly too soft-hearted and naive. Chapter 10:17. Early in the morning, when the Mahist army beat the war drums again, The Chu army had suffered a crushing defeat. The Maoist army opened the gates of Liang City without expending much effort. Almost all of the generals had disappeared, and at least half of the soldiers were unable to participate in the battle. When the soldiers on the city walls saw the white-haired man in white, they immediately lost all of their courage. In an instant, the 800,000 soldiers were utterly defeated. At this time, Mo Jingli was still in the governor's office in the city, unaware of what had happened. The injury this time was undoubtedly a huge blow to him both physically and mentally. Especially when he was still suspicious of whether Mo Xiuyao was still alive, Mo Jingli's temper became even more strange and unpredictable. Being heavily injured, it was difficult for him to even get out of bed, let alone personally command the battle. Emperor. Not good. When Mo Jingli was once again enraged at the imperial physician who had knelt down, the panicked footsteps of an attendant came from outside the door. Mo Jingli frowned and said unhappily, "Get in here." "What is it?" The attendant knelt on the ground and shouted in fear, "Emperor, the Maoist army has attacked." "What?" Mo Jingli suddenly stood up and grimaced in pain. How could the Maoist army attack so quickly? It wasn't that Mo Jingli was arrogant and didn't believe in the Maoist army's abilities. It was that there were 800,000 soldiers in Liang City. Unless these soldiers all surrendered at the same time, the Maoist army would not be able to attack so silently. It's true. All of the generals above the rank of deputy general have disappeared. Half of the soldiers suddenly had a stomachache. Also, someone seems to have seen Prince Ding appear at the city gates. The attendant who came to report didn't see Mo Xiuyao himself, and the person who came back with the report didn't say anything clearly either. After all, the already dead Prince Ding suddenly appearing at the city gates scared many people. Most of the normal soldiers couldn't imagine that Prince Ding had been killed. Their first reaction was to think that they had seen a ghost. Mo Xiuyao. Mo Jingli's face paled. Even his hands under his sleeves couldn't help but tremble. What happened? Find out for me. The attendant said in a trembling voice, "Emperor, the Maoist army has already attacked the city gates. We should escaped." Escape? Mo Jingli's eyes filled with blood. "Where can I escape to now?" The attendant advised, "As long as there's life, there's hope. We're caught by Prince Ding." The attendant trembled. He was Mo Jingli's trusted aide. If he was caught by Prince Ding, he would definitely die. They had heard of Prince Ding's reputation many times over the years. Hearing the attendant's words, Mo Jingli's expression changed slightly. His eyes flickered. This battle was very easy. There were almost no casualties on either side. When the white-clothed Prince Ding elegantly landed in the middle of the largest street in Liang City, everyone couldn't help but stop the weapons in their hands. They heard Mo Xiuyao's voice spread in all directions. "All soldiers of Dechu State, put down your weapons. I will let bygones be bygones." Some people hesitated. These people were all normal soldiers. Without a general to lead them, they were like a sheet of loose sand. They didn't even know what to do next. The Maoist army and the Prince Ding mansion were the places that every native of Dechu State revered the most. The Dechu State's past glory, protected by the Maoist army, was also the deepest memory of everyone who experienced the Dechu State's war. Soon some people threw down the weapons in their hands. If there was one, there would be a second. Soon the sound of weapons falling to the ground could be heard throughout the street. The commoners who had been hiding in their homes all came out. With Chu Shaoying as the leader, the masters of the noble families in Yunzhou all came forward to welcome him. This commoner congratulates His Highness Prince Ding. Welcome His Highness Prince Ding. Long live Prince Ding. The crowd erupted into cheers. Soon the cheers swept through the entire Liang City like a wave. It was expected that the siege would last for a long time, but it was resolved with almost no casualties. The generals of the Maoist army all showed gratified smiles. Leng Huai stood by the street and looked at Lu Jingxian, who was not far away. He said with a smile, "One person can really fight against 1,000,000 soldiers. In the whole world except for His Highness Prince Ding, who else can have such a reputation?" As a veteran general of the Maoist army, Lu Jingxian also felt honored. He nodded and said with a smile, "General Leng is right. Except for Prince Ding, who else can have such a reputation in the whole world?" Leng Huai smiled faintly. Although the battle with the West Hill had not been decided yet, Judging from Prince Ding's deployment, it was clear that the Shilling army's good days were about to come to an end. In the whole world except for Prince Ding, who else could control it? The world that had been separated for hundreds of years was finally going to be united again in the hands of the Prince Ding mansion. A true imperial dynasty was about to arrive. Even a veteran like Leng Huai could not help but feel excited. I am about to send troops to the West Hill. All soldiers of the Dechu state who are willing to follow I to fight the West Hill follow I tomorrow. Those who are not stay in Liang. After the battle is over, you can go back to Jiangnan, Mo Xiuyao said faintly. We are willing to follow His Highness Prince Ding to fight the West Hill. We are willing to follow His Highness Prince Ding. We pledge our lives to follow Prince Ding. Dechu that was on the verge of collapse and Ding Wangfu that was at the peak of its power. The incompetent and temperamental king of Chu and the wise and farsighted Prince Ding. Mo Jingli, who used soldiers as cannon fodder, and Mo Xiuyao, who loved soldiers as if they were his children, did not need to be chosen. Mo Xiuyao nodded in satisfaction. Very good. Starting immediately, all of the Chu army in Liang will belong to the Mahist army. We pledge our lives to the prince. After instructing Lu Jingxian and Leng Huai to settle down the soldiers of the Dechu state who had just surrendered, Mo Xiuyao led people to the governor's manor where Mo Jingli was. He entered Mo Jingli's room with familiarity and saw only the imperial physician and attendants who had died. Mo Jingli himself was nowhere to be found. Mo Jingli escaped? Prince, I will immediately send people to search for him. Su Qingfeng said in annoyance. Previously he had only sent people to surround the governor's manor and did not send Qi Lin to keep an eye on it. Who would have thought that Mo Jingli would still be able to escape from the governor's manor after being surrounded by so many soldiers? Mo Xiuyao nodded and said, Go, don't blame yourself. Compared to taking over Liang City, Mo Jingli is not a big deal. Although on the surface it was taking over Liang City without shedding a drop of blood, a lot of blood had been spilled. Mo Jingli's trusted guards, the shadow guard of the Dechu state's imperial family, some of the generals who were still loyal to Mo Jingli, and some of the families who had already surrendered to Mo Jingli needed to be cleaned up as soon as possible. Also, as the emperor, how could Mo Jingli not have a shadow guard? Although the shadow guard of the Dechu state's imperial family could not compare to the Mahist army's Qi Lin, they were not any worse than Lei Zhenting's gold-clothed guards. They could not fight head-on, but it was not difficult to escape with one person. Chapter 10:18. Su Qingfeng nodded and turned to leave. Mo Xiuyao lowered his head and glanced at the room filled with blood. His lips curved into a cold smile. Mo Jingli, if I were you, I would rather die here. Perhaps I would feel better. Mo Xiuyao did not stay in Liang for long because of Mo Jingli's escape. The next morning, Mo Xiuyao left Liang with Leng Huai, He Su and 1,000,000 soldiers before dawn. He only left behind 200,000 soldiers and Lu Jingxian and Yun Ting to guard the area east of Liang. Now that Mo Jingli was heavily injured and defeated, he would not be able to come out for a long time. Moreover, even if he recovered and came out, Mo Xiuyao had prepared many things for him. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to do anything. In a situation where they were not at a disadvantage in terms of military strength, Mo Xiuyao had absolute confidence in Lu Jingxian's ability. At this time, in a secluded courtyard dozens of li outside of Liang City, it looked like an ordinary farmhouse from the outside, but the atmosphere in the courtyard was chilling. A few men who looked like guards stood in the courtyard and listened to the painful groans coming from inside with serious expressions. In the dark room, Mo Jingli stared at the man who was being forced to kneel not far away with a twisted expression. The man was beaten until he was covered in blood and was on the verge of death. Speak, how did the Mahist army enter the city? Mo Jingli asked with a dark expression. The man shook his head with difficulty, his eyes were filled with pleading. He really did not know how the Mahist army entered the city, and did not know why the Chu army soldiers suddenly had diarrhea after using the newly delivered food. After all, he was just a lowly grain officer. If he knew that he would be punished like this after escaping, he would rather stay in Liang City as a captive. Mo Jingli immediately lost his patience and said in a low voice, "Throw it out." The man was terrified and wanted to beg for mercy, but he couldn't even make a sound. Being thrown out didn't mean that the torture was over. Instead, it meant that his life was coming to an end. These days he was not the first person to suffer, and he definitely would not be the last. Soon the bloodied man was dragged out. No one pitied him. These days Mo Jingli's injuries had not healed. His temper had also become more and more violent. Most people were already used to it. A man who looked like an attendant carefully pushed open the door and entered. Your Majesty? What is it? Mo Jingli asked coldly. Mo Jingli had become exceptionally gloomy ever since he had suffered such a terrible injury. Even the room he lived in had become gloomy. Usually no light could be seen. When the attendant came in, he finally adjusted to the darkness of the room, but he was still frightened by Mo Jingli's gloomy appearance. Suppressing the fear in his heart, the attendant said in a low voice, "Your Majesty. Prince Ding has subdued all of the soldiers in Liang City. Yesterday morning he took the soldiers and left Liang City to head west." The gloomy room was silent for a long time. After a while, Mo Jingli's voice slowly and fiercely sounded. "Mo Xiaoyao took my soldiers to fight against Enchanting? Your Majesty, yes. The 800,000 Mahist army in Liang City have all submitted to Prince Ding." The attendant said in a suppressed voice. "Bastards. These traitors. I will kill all 9 generations of their families." With a whoosh, something flew past the attendant's ear and landed on the floor behind him. That attendant's legs gave out and he quickly fell to the ground. "Your Majesty, please calm down. Your Majesty, please take care of your body." Mo Jingli smiled coldly. He stared at the attendant kneeling on the ground and said, "Take care? You all want me to die, right? This servant doesn't dare. Your Majesty, please have mercy." The man on the ground said in a trembling voice, "Your Majesty. Your Majesty, please calm down. When we return to Jiangnan, it won't be too late to find the Prince Ding mansion for revenge after we reorganize the soldiers. Right now, the north is almost completely filled with the Prince Ding mansion's soldiers. We shouldn't stay here for long." After venting, Mo Jingli gradually recovered a bit of his consciousness. He looked at the sweating attendant in front of him and said coldly, "Stand up." The attendant knew that he had passed today and secretly let out a sigh of relief. He quickly thanked the emperor and stood up. His respect seemed to make Mo Jingli very satisfied. Mo Jingli's voice also became more peaceful. "Go prepare. We'll return to Jiangnan tomorrow morning." Yes, Your Majesty, Lord Chiu requests an audience." Outside the door a guard reported. Mo Jingli frowned slightly and said with some displeasure, "What is he doing here?" Outside the door Lord Chiu's voice was still slightly panting. It was clear that he had hurried in. He said, "Your Majesty, I have an urgent matter to report." "Come in." Lord Chiu pushed open the door and entered. He frowned at the darkness in the room. Just as he was about to say something, Mo Jingli asked in a low voice, "What is it?" Lord Chiu took out a folded piece of paper from his sleeve and said, "Your Majesty, please take a look. I just tore this from a county town not far away. It's a joint announcement made by several aristocratic families in Yunzhou." Mo Jingli suddenly sat up and said, "Chu Xiaoying? Quickly let me see." The attendant took the paper from Lord Chiu's hand and presented it to the emperor. He also lit a candlestick not far from the bedside. Only then did the two of them see Mo Jingli's appearance on the bed clearly. Because of his serious injuries and the anger of the past few days, Mo Jingli's face was very pale and he had become very thin. Most importantly, he had a feeling of extreme disharmony. Lord Chiu frowned and didn't dare to look again. He was neither Mo Jingli's confidant nor an important official. He didn't know Mo Jingli very well. Although he knew there was something wrong with the emperor's appearance, he didn't have time to care about these things right now. Mo Jingli unfolded the paper in his hand. The smile on his lips froze. What was written in the notice was not what he thought was criticizing Mo Xiaoyao and Prince Ding's various crimes and declarations of loyalty to him. Instead, it was various accusations against him. From him poisoning Mo Jingqi, putting the Empress Dowager under house arrest, killing Mo Siyun, to him abandoning the city and fleeing, forming an alliance with the northern tribes of Xiling and so on. Everything was described clearly as if he had seen it with his own eyes. Sometimes the pen of these literati was sharper than a knife. In their words, Mo Jingli was a despicable person who killed the emperor and seized the throne. He was unfilial and disregarded the safety of the world. What made Mo Jingli even angrier was that this announcement had been posted before the Mahist army attacked Liang. The signatures at the bottom indicated that the announcement had been made the day after Chu Shaoying declared his loyalty to him. The people who signed the announcement were the heads of the families who had declared their loyalty after Chu Shaoying. Chu Shaoying. Mo Jingli gritted his teeth. His gaze shot towards Lord Chiu like lightning. Why wasn't there any news in Liang before? Lord Chiu hurriedly said, it wasn't suitable for them to make the announcement in Liang at the beginning. At first it was in a small county 30 li away from Liang. After that it was spread everywhere. However, no news was ever released in Liang. That's why we... Lord Chiu lowered his head as he spoke, but his mind was filled with calculations. Looking at the emperor's appearance, what was written on the announcement was probably true. Even though he did not know the truth behind the deaths of the two previous emperors, the fact that the emperor had abandoned the Chu capital and was unable to escape, and that he had joined forces with the northern tribes and Xiling to attack the Mo army after King Ding's manor had taken back the Chu capital was something that everyone in the world knew. The emperor was finished. Chapter 10:19. Trash. Pass down the order, bring the heads of Chu Shaoying and those bastards back to see me. Mo Jingli roared angrily. Your Majesty. The attendant beside him said awkwardly, I'm afraid. Prince Ding left a group of 200 Qilin in Liang City. I'm afraid that our people in Liang. As the saying goes, blessings do not come in pairs and misfortunes do not come singly. Just when Mo Jingli thought that he was already unlucky enough, there were still more unlucky things waiting for him. The group of people did not even have time to heal Mo Jingli's injuries before they secretly headed towards Jiangnan. But they did not expect that in less than 2 days, another piece of news spread throughout the country. The Empress Dowager of Dechu State and the officials of Nanjing deposed Mo Jingli on the grounds that the emperor had murdered the 2 previous emperors and caused the deaths of millions of soldiers. They supported the previous emperor Mo Jingqi's son, Mo Suiyun, who was 14 years old, to become the emperor. They also announced that they would mend their relationship with the Prince Ding mansion and attack Xiling together. Without waiting for Mo Jingli to return, Mo Suiyun ascended the emperor with the support of the Empress Dowager and the officials. On the second day of his ascension, he ordered an army of 300,000 soldiers to cross the Yunlan River and march towards Xiling. After receiving this news, Mo Jingli vomited blood on the spot and fainted. After he woke up, he screamed crazily and smashed everything in the room. This caused his already injured body to become even weaker. However, Mo Jingli was still unwilling to stop. Mo Xiao, I will definitely kill you. I will definitely kill you. Outside the door, Mo Jingli's high-pitched screams gradually became sharp and ear-piercing, causing the guards outside to tremble uncontrollably. In Lei Tingfeng's army in West Hill, Lei Tingfeng, who had been dealing with Murong Shen and Marquis Nan these days, looked a little tired. After all, Marquis Nan and Murong Shen were veterans who had been on the battlefield for a long time. Even though Lei Tingfeng had the upper hand in terms of military strength, he still did not gain much advantage in the confrontation with them. These days, both sides could only be considered to be in a stalemate, with both sides winning and losing. However, the situation was not as smooth as the father and son had expected. The Xiling army suffered heavy losses as soon as they arrived at Feihong Pass. Even Lei Zhenting was seriously injured. This was definitely something that no one had expected. As a result, the morale of the West Hill troops surrounding the Feihong Pass was low. On the other hand, because of Mo Xiaoyao's death, the Mahist army at Feihong Pass was dressed in mourning clothes and filled with killing intent. They were bent on avenging Prince Ding. Under such a contrast, even if the Xiling army was several times more powerful than the Mahist army, it was not so easy to take down the Feihong Pass in a short time. In the past 2 days, Murong Shen and Marquis Nan, who had been provoking them almost every day, had disappeared. This made Lei Zhenting, who had wanted to wipe them out in one fell swoop, feel as if he had punched cotton. And this sudden change made him faintly feel a trace of uneasiness and conspiracy. "Greetings, Crown Prince." A general in military uniform hurried in. Lei Tingfeng's expression brightened. He sat up and said, "General Yang, why are you in such a hurry?" General Yang frowned and said, "Crown Prince, I just found out that Murong Shen and Marquis Nan's troops suddenly retreated 30 miles last night and set up camp. It seems that they don't plan to fight with us these days." Lei Tingfeng frowned. "Don't plan to fight? Do they have any tricks up their sleeves?" No wonder Lei Tingfeng suspected. They might be able to escape for a while. Anyway, the task of their troops was to kill Marquis Nan and Murong here. But the other side absolutely did not have the time. After all, the Feihong Pass was still surrounded by hundreds of thousands of Xiling army. And behind the Feihong Pass was the headquarters of the Maoist army. Murong and Marquis Nan could not afford to gamble. General Yang frowned and hesitated for a moment before saying, I think Marquis Nan and Murong are no longer in the army at this time. What did you say? Lei Tingfeng suddenly got up and said in a low voice, Did they rush back to the Feihong Pass? That's impossible. Even if they are escorted by Qi Lin, we have blocked all the roads to the Feihong Pass. They can't go back without alerting us. In order to trap Marquis Nan and Murong outside the Feihong Pass, Lei Tingfeng spent a lot of effort. Without these two strong generals in their prime at this time in the Feihong Pass, except for Yi Li and Feng Jiao, the most capable fighter was the old General Yuan Pei, who was in his 70s. General Yang was silent for a moment and said, But I have sent people to investigate. At least 50% sure that these two people are really not in the army. If Murong and Marquis Nan were afraid of one of them, the Maoist army would never retreat so far to set up camp. It was obvious that they did not want to fight with them for the time being. Lei Tingfeng frowned anxiously. If they didn't return to the Feihong Pass and are not in the army, where did they go? No, send people to investigate first. What if this is a trap they designed in advance? Yes, I will do as you say. General Yang saluted. Young Prince, something bad has happened. There was a sound of hurried footsteps outside the tent. Lei Tingfeng frowned unhappily and said, Come in and talk. The person outside the door hurriedly came in and said while panting, Young Prince, there is a large army coming toward us from the direction of Liang. According to the estimate of the scouts in front, there are at least 700,000 to 800,000 people. What? Mo Jingli was defeated. General Yang was shocked. Lei Tingfeng looked dignified. No, where did the Maoist army get 700,000 to 800,000 people? Even if Ling Huai and Lu Jinxian's men were not damaged, they were not enough to fight 800,000 people. What's more, after fighting for so long, how could they not be damaged? How could they not be left to guard? Moreover, the Maoist army had always strictly prohibited conscription on the battlefield. It was impossible for the Maoist army to have so many people. Who is leading the army? Lei Tingfeng asked. It's Mo Shuyao. The scouts in front said that they saw the flag of the Prince Ding mansion. Chapter 10:20. Mo Shuyao? Lei Tingfeng suddenly turned around and accidentally kicked the incense burner beside his feet. He stared fiercely at the soldier who came to report and asked, Are you sure it is Mo Shuyao? The soldier looked at the crown prince who had lost his composure. He only heard it from the scout who came back. How could he be sure? After thinking for a while, he said, The scout is sure that he saw the Maoist army's flag. The black-silver python flag of the Maoist army was only flown when Prince Ding was personally leading the army. Lei Tingfeng calmed down and said, Let the scout in. I want to ask him personally. Yes. Very quickly, the scout who was eavesdropping on the situation outside walked in and bowed to Lei Tingfeng. This subordinate greets the crown prince. Lei Tingfeng waved his hand and said hurriedly, Don't worry about this. You said that you saw 800,000 Maoist army coming in this direction? The scout nodded and said, Your Highness, I am sure. 800,000 is more than enough. When I saw them, I was still 100 miles away. With their marching speed, when I rushed back, I am afraid that in at most 2 hours, their vanguard troops will meet with Murong and Marquis Nan's troops. Lei Tingfeng asked in a low voice, You saw the flag of the Prince Ding mansion? Yes, I'm definitely not mistaken. That's why I rushed back as soon as I saw Wang Qi. The scout nodded his head and said with certainty. Lei Tingfeng waved his hand and said, I know. You can leave now. Your Highness, I will leave. After the scout left, Lei Tingfeng fell into the chair absent-mindedly and murmured, Mo Shuyao. Mo Shuyao is not dead? General Yang looked at Lei Tingfeng worriedly and said, Your Highness. Your Highness, should we inform the prince first? I am afraid that the prince does not know yet. They only got the news when the Maoist army was approaching. It showed that Prince Ding's whereabouts were hidden, and once he took action he acted quickly. She was afraid that His Highness was still in the dark. After being reminded by General Yang, Lei Tingfeng immediately came back to his senses and said, "Yes, quickly. You can send someone to deliver all the news here to Imperial Father as fast as possible." "We." Lei Tingfeng took a deep breath and said, "We will block the Mahist army first, at least give my father time to recover." General Yang frowned and said, "Your Highness. You can't. Right now Prince Ding's army is several times more than ours. Once he joins forces with Murong Shin and the others, Prince Ding's army will reach more than 1 million. At that time there would be no need to fight. Prince Ding could crush them with numbers alone." After thinking for a while, General Yang said, "I am willing to stay and block Prince Ding. Your Highness, please go to the prince's army immediately." "No." Lei Tingfeng flatly refused. Even if he was no match for Mo Xiuyao, he would never retreat without a fight. General Yang said anxiously, "Your Highness, please reconsider. Against Prince Ding, whether it is this general alone or this general and heir apparent, there would not be any difference. Your Highness, why do you have to make such an unnecessary sacrifice? As long as Prince and Your Highness are still there, the West Hill will still have a chance to turn defeat into victory." "General Yang." Lei Tingfeng sighed in a low voice. Lei Tingfeng was the prince of Zhennan Palace. If there were no accidents, he would be the ruler of the West Hill in the future. How could he not understand what it meant to give up? However, with his personality, it was extremely difficult for him to abandon his soldiers and run away on the battlefield. General Yang said resolutely, "Your Highness, there is not much time. I'm not sure how long I can block Prince Ding. Your Highness, please leave as soon as possible." Lei Tingfeng closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He bowed deeply to General Yang and said, "Lei Tingfeng is sorry, General. Please accept my bow." Both of them knew that in the past few years, whether it was the generals of the West Hill or the northern tribes, none of them had a good ending in Mo Xiuyao's hands. If General Yang chose to stay, he would definitely be killed. General Yang quickly supported Lei Tingfeng and said, "Your Highness, you are too serious. As a general of the West Hill, it is my duty to sacrifice myself for the country. Besides, to be able to fight Prince Ding, even if I die in battle, my life will not be in vain. Your Highness, please leave." It wasn't a glorious thing to run away before even seeing the face of the opponent. But the lessons he had learned over the years also told Lei Tingfeng that if he did not leave now, he would not be able to. More importantly, Lei Tingfeng had the courage to sacrifice himself for the country, but he could not abandon Zhennan Palace for a moment of bravery. Lei Tingfeng did not see any bloodshed in this battle, but it was destined to be a nightmare for him for the rest of his life. On the mountain road not far from the West Hill military camp, Lei Tingfeng looked back at the quiet military camp. Finally, he turned back and waved his horsewhip, saying in a deep voice, "Let's go." The guards and soldiers behind Lei Tingfeng silently followed the crown prince. They did not know why the crown prince suddenly left the military camp, but as subordinates and soldiers, they did not have the right to say anything. All they could do was to obey. Lei Tingfeng and his men rode as fast as they could. The journey of a few hundred miles took only 4 o'clock in the morning of the next day. Lei Tingfeng's sudden arrival also surprised Lei Zhenting. He knew that something big must have happened. Otherwise, with Lei Tingfeng's character, he would not leave his military camp so easily. He hurriedly got up and went out to meet Lei Tingfeng. He was covered in dust and his eyes were red. It was obvious that he was very tired. "Tingfeng, what happened?" Lei Zhenting frowned and asked. Seeing Lei Zhenting, Lei Tingfeng hurriedly got up and walked forward unsteadily. He grabbed Lei Zhenting and said, "Father." "Mo Xiuyao, Mo Xiuyao." Lei Zhenting's heart sank. He held Lei Tingfeng down and said sternly, "Tingfeng, calm down. Speak slowly." Lei Tingfeng looked at Lei Zhenting and took a deep breath. He said hoarsely, "Father. Mo Xiuyao is still alive." Lei Zhenting was shocked, but he did not lose his composure. From the moment Lei Tingfeng mentioned Mo Xiuyao, Lei Zhenting had already expected something. Lei Zhenting looked at Lei Tingfeng calmly and asked, "Mo Xiuyao is not dead, so you came back?" Perhaps Lei Zhenting's calmness affected Lei Tingfeng. Lei Tingfeng also slowly calmed down. Lei Tingfeng closed his eyes. The corners of his eyes twitched slightly. He said, "Mo Xiuyao brought at least 800,000 soldiers from Liang. In addition to Murong Shin and Marquis Nan's troops. Father, behind us there are at least 1 million Mahist army." Lei Zhenting sighed softly. He patted Lei Tingfeng's shoulder and said, "Father knows. You did the right thing. The Shilling army could be abandoned. General Yang could die. Even Lei Jinting could die. But Lei Tingfeng could not. He was already old. Lei Tingfeng was the hope of West Hill's future. Lei Tingfeng looked at Lei Jinting guiltily. He understood the reason, but he could not help but feel guilty for his own incompetence. If he had the ability to resist Emo Shuyao, so what if Emo Shuyao came back from the dead? Chapter 1021. Seeing that Lei Tingfeng had calmed down, Lei Jinting walked to the side and sat down. Emo Shuyao's sudden revival was quite a shock to him, and he had no choice but to reconsider everything. Emo Shuyao definitely would not have faked his death for no reason, and even gave up the advantage that the Mahist army had gained in the early stages. At this point, Lei Jinting was naturally able to discern a trace of the truth. If the war continued according to the original situation, it would take at least 3 to 5 years before a victor could be decided. Now it seemed that Emo Shuyao's act of faking his death was obviously to quickly resolve this stalemate. And it was obviously very effective at least. Emo Jingli had most likely already been dealt with by him. Otherwise, the Mahist army would not have been able to cross Liang so quickly. And that army of close to 1 million. That was definitely Emo Jingli's original army. Emo Jingli, that trash. I really overestimated him. Lei Jinting said in a low voice. Father, Emo Jingli was never Emo Shuyao's opponent. Lei Tingfeng frowned. Lei Jinting laughed coldly. Opponent? If I guessed correctly, that trash was crippled by Emo Shuyao before he could even exchange blows with Emo Shuyao. Otherwise, where do you think Emo Shuyao's hundreds of thousands of soldiers came from? Emo Shuyao is not a god, and the north has been in chaos for years, and the population is already sparse. How did he create an army of 700,000 to 800,000 soldiers in such a short time? An army was not something that could be formed as long as it was a person. Furthermore, it had to be a young and strong man who had undergone some basic training. Otherwise, with so many people on the battlefield, once chaos broke out, they would be trampled to death without killing their own people. Father, you mean to say that Emo Shuyao's 800,000 soldiers were seized from Emo Jingli's hands? Lei Tingfeng asked in shock. Lei Jinting laughed coldly. Is there any other possibility? He said. Murongshin and Marquis Nan are not in the army? Lei Tingfeng nodded. Although he did not fully understand this matter, Lei Tingfeng still felt that something was wrong when he linked it to Emo Shuyao's sudden appearance. Then he reported everything to Lei Jinting without missing a single detail. Lei Jinting frowned. Not to mention Lei Tingfeng, even he himself could not understand where Marquis Nan and Murongshin could have gone instead of waiting to meet up with Emo Shuyao and return to Feihong Pass together. Since he could not figure it out, he could only put it aside for the time being. After Lei Jinting instructed his generals and aides to pay attention to Emo Shuyao and Emo Jingli's movements in southern Chu, he turned his gaze back to Feihong Pass. At this point, with Emo Shuyao's speed, it was already too late for them to retreat. Moreover, if they retreated with their tails between their legs, where would the West Hill put its face? If Emo Shuyao continued to pursue them, it would be even worse for the West Hill. In addition, Lei Jinting had a vague premonition that this time would be the last time he fought with the Mahist army. At Feihong Pass, the Mahist army was still dressed in mourning, waiting for battle. At the foot of Feihong Pass, the Shilling army was similarly imposing, eyeing covetously. On the city gate tower, Yi Li and old General Yuan Pei stood side by side. Beside them stood Feng Jiao, Leng Haoyu, Han Mingyue, Qin Feng and the others. General Yuan Pei chuckled and said, "It seems that Lei Jinting is determined to take Feihong Pass. Looking at this situation, he will not retreat until he takes Feihong Pass." Feng Jiao frowned and said, "Did Lei Jinting take the wrong medicine? His injuries haven't healed yet, have they?" Yi Li nodded and said indifferently, "His injuries won't heal without 2 or 3 months. Look over there." Han Mingyue, who was standing on the side, raised his hand and pointed. Everyone looked in the direction he pointed. At the back of the army, where the flag was fluttering, stood a tall man in armor. Feng Jiao frowned and said, "That is Lei Tingfeng. Why is he here? Shouldn't he be with General Murong and the others?" "Could it be?" Yi Li said firmly. "No, Lei Tingfeng alone can't deal with Marquis Nan and General Murong. Lei Tingfeng's face doesn't look good. Something must have happened over there." Han Mingyue raised his eyebrows and said, "Princess is so confident? If so, why haven't General Murong and Marquis Nen come back yet? Yili frowned and shook his head. I don't know. Han Mingshi rubbed his forehead and groaned. He pointed below and said, I say we should be worried about the people below. More than 600,000 soldiers. They can even smash Feihong Pass with stones, can't they? Yuan Pei glanced at Han Mingshi with dissatisfaction and said, Kid Han, what are you talking about? As long as I am still alive, Feihong Pass will not be broken. Then you must live a long, long life. Han Mingshi's lips curled into a smile. The people on the city tower were talking happily, but the West Hill generals below were not in a good mood. Especially when they saw the large number of white clothes. Originally, they were bleak and heavy in the eyes of the West Hill people. Now, in the eyes of the West Hill people, they were clearly mocking them. A hot-tempered West Hill general took the lead and rushed out. He pointed his spear at the city tower and shouted, People of the Mahist army, come down and accept your death. On the city tower, Feng Jiao curled his lips and said, It seems that the West Hill people have taken the wrong medicine today. Well, I will come and meet you. Feng Jiao supported himself on the city wall with his right hand. A flamboyant red robe directly floated down from the city tower. On the battlefield, Feng Jiao also put away his usual folding fan. He unfolded the long sword in his hand and stabbed toward the general. The general was also a famous fierce general in the West Hill army. He had a deep hatred with the Mahist army. His family was among the people that Emo Shuyao killed in the Emperor of Xiling. At this time, seeing Feng Jiao rushing over, he also raised his spear and stabbed at Feng Jiao without dodging. In the blink of an eye, the two of them had exchanged 7 or 8 moves. No one had the upper hand. Feng Jiao's thin lips slightly curved and whispered, It's a bit interesting. I want to see what ability you have to dare to ask the Mahist army to accept your death. Princess, something is wrong. Yuan Pei, who was suddenly watching the battle, narrowed his eyes and said in a low voice, Quickly call Feng San back. Unfortunately, it was too late. Before Yuan Pei's voice died away, the West Hill army had already shot thousands of arrows in the direction of Feng Jiao. The people on the tower couldn't help but exclaim, Feng San? In the face of such a sudden change, Feng Jiao was shocked but not panicked. He swooped forward and landed on the horse of the West Hill general who wanted to take the opportunity to withdraw from the battlefield. The West Hill general turned over and wanted to knock Feng Jiao off his horse. However, he didn't expect to feel a chill on his neck and fall off the horse himself. After Feng Jiao killed the West Hill general, he didn't dare to stay for a moment. He flew in the direction of the city tower. Finally, at the last moment when the arrows hit him, he fell into a circle of barriers in front of the city gate and avoided a disaster. Lying on the ground, Feng Jiao gasped for breath and sweated profusely. Just now he had clearly felt the arrow piercing through his head. To be able to dodge this sudden attack, it was really a stroke of good fortune. Just as Feng Jiao was gasping for breath and secretly cursing Lei Jinting for being despicable, the two armies had already started fighting. Soon the city gate opened and countless Mahist army soldiers rushed out of the gate. The Xiling army had too many people. If they didn't go out of the city to resist the enemy, once Lei Jinting went all out and persevered to climb the city wall, the Feihong Pass would fall sooner or later. The best way was to prevent the Xiling army from approaching the city tower of the Feihong Pass. However, this would cause too much damage to the Mahist army. It was unknown how long they could hold on. But now there was nothing they could do but defend to the death. Chapter 1022. As soon as the Mahist army left the city, they were quickly besieged by the Xiling army. There were less than 100,000 soldiers and horses out of the city. Compared to the Xiling army of more than 600,000, the difference was too big. Although the Mahist army was incomparably valiant, they did not have much chance of winning in such a sea of people tactic. However, under such circumstances, a group of people from the Xiling army suddenly appeared in the chaos. These people were all dressed in yellow. Compared to the ordinary Xiling soldiers, they were more fierce and valiant. In a one-on-one situation, they were even more powerful than the Mahist army soldiers. They had just joined for a while and many Mahist army soldiers had died tragically. Although it was not enough to shake the defense line built by the Mahist army soldiers with flesh and blood, the outcome was expected after a long time. It's the gold-clad guards. Lung Haoyu said in a deep voice. Like the shadow guard of the Prince Ding mansion and the royal family of Dechu State, Lei Jinting's troops were called the Gold-Clad Guards. Lei Jinting had even taken out his private guards, which could be said to be his hidden trump card. Everyone could feel not only Lei Jinting's determination to break through Feihong Pass, but also a hidden impatience. Qin Feng, how many people did Qilin bring? Yi Li asked in a deep voice. Qin Feng said, 3 teams stayed in Li City, 2 teams followed General Liu, 1 team followed General Zhang, and the remaining 6 teams were at Feihong Pass. Over the years, Qilin's members had about 3,000 people divided into 12 teams. This time, understanding that it was not easy to guard Feihong Pass, Qin Feng transferred all the idle Qilin to Feihong Pass in case of emergency. Yi Li nodded and said, very good. 4 teams stopped the gold-clad guards and the remaining 2 teams, kill them. This subordinate obeys. Qin Feng's expression was solemn as he bowed to Yi Li. Then he turned around and went down the city gate tower to mobilize his men. Amidst the chaos, a group of men in black appeared on the battlefield. Less than 1,000 men and horses did not stand out among the Mahist army, which was also dressed in black. But when they rushed into the middle of the enemy, they made people feel their terrifying attack power. The Mo family soldiers, who were originally in a precarious situation with the golden-robed guards, were separated. The golden-robed guards that the Mo family soldiers had been struggling to fend off seemed to be unable to withstand a single blow from the Mo family soldiers. Their martial arts might not be higher than the gold-robed guards, but their methods were clearly more effective than the gold-robed guards. They also knew how to cooperate better than the arrogant gold-robed guards. The originally invincible 5,000 gold-robed guards were quickly cut into countless small pieces and annihilated one by one in the face of over 1,000 Qilin. On the other hand, the other 2 pairs were charging towards the rear of the Shilin army with an unstoppable momentum. During this process, many people were left behind and some even died. But the remaining people did not stop rushing forward. Lei Jinting and Lei Tingfeng sat on horseback and looked at Qilin, who was fighting against the golden-robed guards in the distance. This is Qilin. Lei Jinting nodded with a serious expression. Even on the chaotic battlefield, he could see that under Qilin's sharp blades, the number of gold-robed guards that he had always been at ease with was decreasing at an alarming rate. Release the arrows. Such a terrifying army could not be allowed to exist. Lei Jinting pointed with his horsewhip and said sternly. Black Cloud Cavalry, release the arrows. On the city gate tower, Yi Li also gave the same order. For a moment, arrows rained down on the battlefield. Whether it was the Mahist army or the Shilin army, there were countless casualties. Father, look over there. Lei Tingfeng said angrily and pointed forward. Lei Jinting was stunned. Suddenly, a team of less than 500 people shot towards the heart of the Shilin army like a black arrow. On the battlefield, hundreds of thousands of West Hill soldiers were actually able to open a bloody path and rush towards them. Lei Tingfeng frowned and said, they want to assassinate father? Quick, release the arrows. But it would not be so easy. As soon as the first arrow was released, these people quickly scattered and merged into the Shilin army. If they released the arrows, they would have to kill their own people as well. And with these people's skills, most of the people who would be killed would be their own people. But once the danger was over, these people gathered together again at the same speed, and even maintained the momentum of charging forward in the process. If one looked carefully, they would find that these people maintained the same formation regardless of whether they scattered or gathered together. Father, you should retreat first. Lei Tingfeng said worriedly. Lei Tingfeng would never make such a suggestion in normal times. But now that his father had not recovered from his serious injuries, he could not make a move at all. Once these people rushed to the front, the consequences would be unimaginable. Lei Jinting's eyes darkened. He looked down at his wound and sighed, no need. They can't rush over. Father. Lei Tingfeng disagreed. Lei Jinting waved his hand to signal him to stop talking. At the same time, he ordered the generals on his left and right, stop these people at all costs. Yes. With a wave of the command flag, countless West Hill soldiers gradually moved towards Genom of Gojoseon. The 2 groups of Qilin were finally heavily surrounded. But even so, they did not panic at all. It was as if they only had one goal in their eyes. They kept moving forward. Princess, we can't kill Lei Jinting. Let them retreat. On the city tower, Lung Haoyu looked at the countless dark yellow figures in the distance and said anxiously. Yi Li closed her eyes and did not answer. Beside her, Qin Feng whispered, they can't retreat and they won't retreat. Because these two groups of Qilin, which only had 500 to 600 people, almost a third of the West Hill soldiers on the battlefield had retreated. Genom of Gojoseon was more important to the Shilling army than Emo Xiao was to the Mahist army. But now Genom of Gojoseon was too weak to withstand the slightest accident. They did not need to kill Lei Zhenting. As long as they acted like they wanted to kill Lei Zhenting at all costs, it was enough to make the Shilling army nervous. However, these Qilins were destined to become the sacrificial lambs of this battle. Chapter 1023. I'll bring people to save them, Lung Haoyu said anxiously. Yili turned her head and looked at him indifferently. Save them? For 500 people, another 50,000 people will be sacrificed? Lung Haoyu was speechless. He suddenly felt a chill in his heart, but more than that, he was ashamed and guilty. Qilin was built and trained by Yili herself. Although Princess Ding could command the entire Mahist army, Yili had always been very careful and rarely interfered with the Mahist army and the Black Cloud cavalry. Qilin could be said to be personally created by Ding Wangfei and was her most loyal personal guard. If it wasn't because she had no other choice with Wang Fei's personality, why would she send these people out knowing they would die? In war, a general was destined to bear a burden that ordinary people could not bear. Her every word and action could determine the life and death of thousands of soldiers. At this time the choice became very important. The choice was very likely to affect the outcome of this war and even the rise and fall of a country. That was why there was a saying, "The merciful cannot command soldiers and the righteous cannot manage finances." Yili, on the other hand, had already become a qualified commander. Such a choice might be cold, but there was no other choice. Princess Ding is righteous. Old General Yuan Pei looked at the black figures in the distance that were drowned by the Shilling army and said in a low voice. Yili's lips curved into a faint smile and sighed softly. A general's success is built on the bones of thousands. A drop of transparent liquid quietly fell from the corner of her beautiful eyes and disappeared in a moment. A general's success is built on the bones of thousands. Lung Haoyu murmured softly. Suddenly he roared and jumped down from the top of the city wall and rushed into the chaos. Kill. Defend Fei Hong Pass to the death. On the city wall, a few more figures quickly jumped down and joined the chaos. On the city wall, only Yuan Pei, Yili and Zhuijing were left. The 500 Qilin were quickly drowned in the hundreds of thousands of Shilling army and disappeared. The black-clothed Qilin who were originally fighting with the gold-robed guards let out a sharp whistle. When the last gold-robed guard was killed, all the Qilin gave a Qilin military salute to Yili who was on the city wall. Then they all rushed in the direction where the 500 Qilin disappeared. The mission that their comrades could not complete they would continue. On the battlefield, a black arrow that was even larger than the previous one shot towards the rear of the West Hill army at lightning speed. Seeing their actions, someone from the Mahist army and suddenly shouted, "Black Cloud Cavalry! Open the way for the brothers of Qilin! Mahist army! Go!" Countless cavalrymen and infantrymen in white started to rush into the Shilling army. The Black Cloud Cavalry's armored cavalry charged into the army like a white tornado, opening up a path for the Qilin following behind them. The Mahist army infantrymen who were following behind immediately rushed up and fought with the West Hill soldiers who were in a mess. At this moment it was no longer just defending the city. Originally, attacking was the best defense. However, the difference in numbers between the Mahist army and the West Hill army was too big, so they could only defend. However, when everyone was in a killing frenzy, no one cared about whether they were defending or attacking. There was only one thing in their eyes: to die with the enemy. If I can't live, you will die with me. At this moment, people who were standing far away would see a strange scene. The Mahist army and the Black Cloud Cavalry protected a small group of black Qilin as they rushed forward in the Shilling army. They were heading straight for the commander's flag and the king's flag at the back of the Shilling army. They were invincible. No one cared about the increasing number of Shilling army behind them, and no one cared that it was getting harder and harder to move forward. As long as they were still breathing, they would keep moving forward. These guys are crazy. At the back of the Shilling army, Lei Tingfeng angrily looked at the chaotic battlefield in front of him. Who would have thought that in such a face-to-face confrontation, the momentum of the Shilling army of hundreds of thousands would be suppressed by the Mahist army of less than 200,000. No matter what, the West Hill had lost today's battle. When it came to morale, one side was strong and the other was weak. Once the momentum was suppressed, the Shilling army would not be able to break through Feihong Pass no matter what. Enchanting sighed slightly and said in a low voice, Mahist army? Black Cloud cavalry. Qilin, they are indeed famous in the world. Father, you should retreat first. Lei Tingfeng said worriedly. Enchanting shook his head. No, this time we must eliminate Qilin and the Black Cloud cavalry. Beat the drums. Lei Tingfeng had no choice but to order the beating of the drums. The earth-shattering sound of the drums sounded on the battlefield. The soldiers of the West Hill were all shocked. The sudden crazy attack of the Mahist army just now had made them panic for a moment and even lost their formation. At this moment they came to their senses and immediately rushed to fight with the Mahist army again. On the tower of Feihong Pass, Yili stood in front of a huge war drum that was much taller than her. He picked up the 2 drumsticks that were placed beside him and hit them heavily. Dong, dong, dong. The sound of the war drum became more and more frequent and soon covered the sound of the Shilling army's war drum. Many people hurriedly looked back and saw a slender woman dressed in white on the tall city gate tower in the distance. She was waving a drumstick and beating a huge war drum. It was as if the drums were beating on everyone's hearts, and the sound of battle horses could be faintly heard within the sound of war drums. Thank you, brothers. Qilin, do it. In the chaos, Qin Feng, who was at the front, shouted. Lin Han and Wei Lin beside him jumped up at the same time. Qilin, who was originally sandwiched between the Black Cloud cavalry and the Mahist army, was divided into 3 groups. He overtook them at a faster speed and went to the back of the Shilling army. The Black Cloud cavalry and the Mahist army had completed their mission. They would not be able to return from now on. The leading general of the Black Cloud cavalry casually chopped down a West Hill soldier who was sneaking up on him. He silently said goodbye to Qilin. He raised the long sword in his hand and shouted, Return to defend Feihong Pass. It was still the Black Cloud cavalry leading the way. The rest of the soldiers and horses once again turned around and rushed to the periphery of the Shilling army. Qin Feng, Lin Han and Wei Lin each led a group of Qilin to the direction of Enchanting. There were people dying along the way, but no one had time to care about that. Everyone's black clothes were almost soaked in blood. They were like a group of evil spirits from hell. Many of the West Hill soldiers instinctively wanted to retreat. However, they soon became ghosts under the sword. Qilin, who originally had more than 1,000 people, was less than 300 people when they were about to reach the back of the Shilling army. However, the remaining 300 people were enough to make all the West Hill soldiers feel terrified. Qin Feng gestured to Lin Han and Wei Lin. The 2 of them nodded at the same time. Just when the people of West Hill thought that the 300 people were going to risk their lives to assassinate Genom of Gojoseon and began to shrink their defense, Qin Feng still led people forward and rushed to Genom of Gojoseon and Lei Tingfeng. Lin Han and Wei Lin rushed to the left and right sides of the other 2 generals who were holding the line. Chapter 1024. Not good. Lei Tingfeng exclaimed, Quickly release the arrows. Kill them all. Unfortunately, it was too late. Before the arrows were shot, the Qilin in black had already rushed into the army. From afar, Lei Tingfeng saw Lin Han sneering at him. At the same time, Lin Han's sword had already chopped off the head of the general of the left. Enchanting's face turned pale. Hundreds of thousands of people could not stop 1,000. Retreat. Even if Enchanting did not want to admit it, the West Hill still lost this battle. What they lost was not only the battle, but also the fighting spirit of the West Hill soldiers. From now on, unless the West Hill had the same or even better battle record to defeat the Mahist army. Otherwise, the Mahist army would become the nightmare of all the West Hill soldiers. No one won this battle. Enchanting's plan to take down Feihong Pass as quickly as possible was foiled. The morale of the West Hill soldiers plummeted. The gold-clad guards were all wiped out. 2 of the West Hill generals and 5 of their deputies were killed. The Mahist army once again defended Feihong Pass. Then half of the original 200,000 soldiers were lost. Qilin, who was known as the strongest in the Mahist army, had less than 100 people return. 5 of the 16 commanders died and 1 was seriously injured. Qin Feng and Wei Lin were slightly injured and Lin Han was seriously injured. However, this battle had truly established the Qilin's reputation. According to the statistics of the West Hill after the battle, More than 27,000 West Hill soldiers died in the hands of Qi Lin in this battle. Among them there were 5,000 gold-robed guards and over 70 generals who were above the rank of lieutenant. More than half of the West Hill generals were dead or injured. In the past, Qi Lin's reputation was more for sneak attacks, assassinations, intelligence and other secret places. This battle really made the world understand that an army that could fight against 10 was not just a legend. In a face-to-face battle, 1,000 Qi Lin were enough to destroy 20,000 elite soldiers of the West Hill. Now the world called it Blood Qi Lin. In this battle, both sides suffered heavy losses and had to call a temporary truce. The battlefield outside the Feihong Pass returned to its usual silence, but the thick smell of blood in the air did not dissipate for a long time. Outside a small courtyard in Feihong Pass, Yili stood in front of the gate. Qin Feng followed beside her and whispered worriedly, "Wang Fei, should we go back and rest first?" After today's battle, everyone was physically and mentally exhausted. Wang Fei had not had a good rest in the past few days. Yili shook her head and asked, "Have you sent Xiaobao away?" Qin Feng nodded and said, "I sent him away this morning. This subordinate estimates that the little heir will arrive at Glass City by tomorrow morning at the latest." Yili nodded and said, "That's good. You stay here. I'll go in and take a look." This was an extremely inconspicuous small courtyard. It was originally for the soldiers stationed at Feihong Pass. Now the people living here were Qi Lin survivors who had just retreated from the battlefield. Entering the small courtyard, they saw many people lying under the eaves in the courtyard. Many people did not even have time to change their clothes. They just casually bandaged their wounds and sat on the ground to sleep. Xin Yang was directing his men to bandage the wounds of the people. The Mahist army also suffered heavy casualties. All the military doctors went to take care of them. Xin Yang came here personally. Seeing Yili come in, Xin Yang quickly got up and bowed. Yili shook her head, indicating that he did not need to be so polite. Xin Yang then turned around and continued to bandage a wounded soldier in front of him. Not wanting to disturb the rest of these wounded soldiers, Yili and Xin Yang went to the inner room to talk. Yili asked, "Mr. Shen, are their injuries serious?" Xin Yang shook his head and said, "Only a few of them are seriously injured. I'm afraid they won't be able to fully recover in the future. The others are fine. They will be fine after a few days of rest." Yili breathed a sigh of relief and nodded, "Then I'll have to trouble Mr. Shen. If you need anything, Mr. Shen can just send someone to tell Zhuijing." Xin Yang nodded solemnly and said, "Princess, don't worry. This old man promises that their injuries will be fine. These people are real indomitable men." Although Xin Yang did not personally go to the battlefield, he still knew what happened on the battlefield. For these soldiers who risked their lives, even as a doctor, Xin Yang could not help but admire them. "How are Lin Han and the others?" Yili asked again. When the soldiers were retreating, she saw Lin Han being carried back. His injuries were definitely not serious. Xin Yang sighed and said, "Wei Lin and Qin Feng are both lightly injured, but Lin Han's injuries are very serious. This subordinate suggests that after he wakes up he should be moved to a quiet place to recuperate. There shouldn't be any big problems in the future. But his martial arts, I'm afraid." Yili was silent for a while, then nodded and said, "I understand. Mr. Shin, please arrange it. Mr. Shin, please take good care of them. This consort still has something to do, so I'll leave first." Xin Yang looked at Yili and sighed. "This subordinate sees that princess's complexion is not very good. Please take care of yourself. These things are not princess's fault." Yili smiled faintly, but there was a trace of indescribable bitterness in her smile. She nodded slightly and said, "Thank you, Mr. Shen." Looking at Yili's back, Xin Yang sighed helplessly and shook his head. He turned and continued to busy himself. With such a heavy pressure, not to mention a woman, even a man might not be able to bear it. In fact, Princess was only a woman in her 20s. If she had not married into Ding Wangfu, she might just be a gentle and elegant young married woman who lived like a princess. Now she had to bear the burden of hundreds of thousands of soldiers in Feihong Pass and the rise and fall of the entire Mahist army and the Prince Ding mansion. For a woman, was such a life really good? Yili returned to the general's mansion. She waved the people around her away and sat down alone in the study. She stared at the scroll in front of her and closed her eyes slightly. A drop of crystal-clear tear fell from the corner of her eye and dripped onto the scroll full of words and quickly disappeared. Yili quickly reached out and wiped away the water stain on the scroll. She added a new word next to her blurry name. This was the name list of all the soldiers in Qilin. But now most of them were no longer there. Yili would never forget that they did not really die for the sake of carrying out the mission. From the beginning, it was destined to be a mission that could not be completed. From the beginning, those people were cannon fodder that she abandoned. As a commander, she knew that what she did was right. But as a soldier, she could never forgive herself. Those people that she abandoned did not even know that they were destined to be cannon fodder from the beginning. After a long silence, Yili took a blank rice paper from the side. She picked up the pen and began to transcribe the names on the name list again, word by word. Only those names that were marked with black marks represented death. The atmosphere in the big tent of the West Hill military camp was heavy. The generals looked at the empty seats around them and only felt a chill in their hearts. The comrades who had been excitedly discussing the war this morning were all living people, regardless of whether they had good relationships with each other or had conflicts with each other. But now half of the people in the big tent were gone. And the cause of all this was only because of 1,000 people in Qilin. Chapter 1025. They are not human. They are demons. A young general murmured with a pale face. The others were not necessarily calmer than him. Everyone sat there in a daze as if they had lost their souls. Enough. Enchanting looked coldly at the generals in front of him and sighed deeply. More than 1,000 Qilin, less than 1/3 of the Shilling army's troops and horses, had beaten hundreds of thousands of Shilling army into a daze. In a short period of time, the West Hill army would be restrained when facing the Mahist army. Prince. A general stood up and hesitated. Prince, I'm afraid we won't be able to break through Feihong Pass for a while. Mo Shuyao has brought hundreds of thousands of troops and is about to rush over. Should we retreat first? Enchanting sneered and asked, Retreat? Can we still retreat now? They had advanced all the way and were too deep into the north. It was already too late to retreat now. At that time they would only be caught off guard by Mo Shuyao midway. The general who spoke also turned pale. Mo Shuyao's troops were behind them. They had no other way except to break through Feihong Pass and return to West Hill through the northwest. But Feihong Pass in front of them was not so easy to break through. Enchanting sighed and said, Today the Mahist army has lost more than half of its men and horses. Now the Mahist army at Feihong Pass will not exceed 100,000 at most. But if they still have Qilin? Someone whispered. No one knew how many Qilin the Mahist army had. Over the years their shadows seemed to be in many places, but no one had really caught their tracks. Many people were very curious about this troop. This time they finally saw it for themselves. However, it brought them endless nightmares. No more. At this point neither side will hold back. In today's battle, Yili must have done her best, Enchanting said solemnly. Lei Tingfeng asked, Father, do you mean, we can take Feihong Pass as long as we fight another big battle? But our troops. The Shilling army was not defeated by the Mahist army, but the morale and soul of the Shilling soldiers were crushed by the Mahist army. In a short period of time he would only be able to display less than half of his abilities on the battlefield. Enchanting waved his hand and said, I have my own plans. Reporting. There's an urgent report from the front. Someone rushed in from outside the tent and reported in a loud voice. Come in. A man dressed in military attire came in quickly and presented a secret letter. Enchanting opened it and his expression changed slightly. He quickly calmed down and said, Everyone go and rest. Reorganize the troops. I'll take my leave. Father, what happened? Only the father and son were left in the tent. Lei Tingfeng asked without hesitation. When his father read the secret letter, Lei Tingfeng clearly saw his hand tremble. Something big must have happened. Enchanting fell back into the chair. His face was pale and a trace of blood seeped through his clothes. Enchanting's yellow battle robe was dyed red. Father. After a long time, Enchanting looked up at Lei Tingfeng and said, Tingfeng, take Feng Li Zhangyi and Shangguan Qing and leave the north. Go back to Shilling. What? Lei Tingfeng was stunned. He couldn't understand Enchanting's sudden order. Puzzled, he picked up the letter Enchanting had placed on the table and read it. Lei Tingfeng's expression was even uglier than Enchanting's. Southern Chu deposed Mo Jingli and formed an alliance with the Prince Ding Mansion? How is that possible? Lei Shinting smiled bitterly. What's impossible about that? There are no eternal enemies in this world. Besides, to the people of Southern Chu compared to the Prince Ding mansion, we are their true enemy. In this world there weren't many people who thought the same as Emo Jingqi and Emo Jingli. Lei Tingfeng looked at the contents of the secret letter. The 800,000 Chu army has pledged allegiance to the Prince Ding mansion. The 300,000 Chu army has crossed the Yunlon River. I never understood where Murong Shin and the Marquis of Nan had suddenly left the battlefield to go. Only now do I understand, they went to Southern Chu. Lei Shinting sighed deeply, somewhat dejectedly. Murong Shin and the Marquis of Nan were famous generals of the Dechu state. With them leading the 300,000 troops sent by Southern Chu, there was naturally no problem. However, he didn't know what benefits Emo Xiuyao had given the Southern Chu court to make them so determined to depose Emo Jingli and send troops to support the Prince Ding mansion. Father, let's go together. Lei Tingfeng said. Lei Tingfeng already understood the current situation. Once Emo Xiuyao's million-man army arrived, even if his father had the power to reach the heavens, he wouldn't be able to escape. Lei Jinting shook his head indifferently. If I don't go, I won't be able to go. Tingfeng, take the 3 generals with you and leave tonight. Other than your personal bodyguards, don't take any soldiers. Regardless of age or ability, Generals Feng, Zhang and Shangguan are the people with the most potential in the Western Tomb. As long as you can suppress them, the Western Tomb won't be at the end of its rope. After you return, do you know what to do? He was seriously injured and couldn't travel long distances. Moreover, things had already come to this. How could he face the people of the Western Tomb? Rather than drag out an ignoble existence, it was better to die a worthy death. No, father. Lei Tingfeng said anxiously. Father, your son begs you, your son's ability is insufficient. I can't shoulder the rise and fall of the Western Tomb. Tingfeng is willing to stay behind and bring up the rear. Father, please take the generals and leave first. Tingfeng. Lei Jinting said sternly. Remember this, from now on the Western Tomb is handed over to you. Yi Li, a woman, can shoulder the responsibility of an entire Mahist army. Are you trying to tell I that you can't even compare to a woman? Father. Lei Jinting closed his eyes and raised his hand to pat Lei Tingfeng's shoulder. It's all my fault for restricting you too much in the past. You have to rely on yourself in the future. Remember, don't fight head-on with the Mahist army. Protect the Western Tomb first. One day you will rise again. These words sounded more like his last words to Lei Tingfeng. In fact, Lei Tingfeng also understood that if he left today, it would indeed be the last time his father scolded him. He couldn't help but burst into tears. Father, your son understands. Lei Jinting patted him heavily and turned around, no longer looking at him. Let's go. Take my token and tell those people to leave with you immediately. Don't stay for even a moment. Your son obeys. Father, take care. Lei Tingfeng's eyes were red. He knelt on the ground and kowtowed 3 times. He got up and took one last look at Lei Jinting's old and bleak back. Then he left resolutely. Tingfeng, if you meet Ling Taihan on the way, tell him, I'm waiting for him at Feihong Pass. Lei Tingfeng nodded silently. He lifted the curtain and walked out. Chapter 1026. This subordinate greets Wang Fei. In the study of Feihong Pass, a man in black knelt on one knee in front of the desk and said in a deep voice. Yi Li looked at him indifferently and asked, Where is Prince? The man in black reported, Prince has led 1,000,000 troops and is approaching Feihong Pass. They will reach Feihong Pass in 2 days at most. Yi Li nodded. Does Prince have any other orders? The man in black took out a letter from his sleeve and presented it, saying, This is what Prince ordered this subordinate to present to Wang Fei. Yi Li took the letter and read it quickly. She calmly nodded and said, I know. You can go. The man in black looked at the indifferent Yi Li in front of him and hesitated. As Emo Xiuyao's trusted shadow guard, he intuitively felt that something was wrong with Wang Fei, but he couldn't see what the problem was. He could only respectfully leave. Wang Fei, take care. This subordinate will leave. In the study it quickly became quiet again. Yi Li looked at the letter in front of her and slightly lowered her eyes. Her lips curved into a faint smile. Xiuyao, have you thought about, what if Feihong Pass is breached? Outside the door, Feng Zhiao said in a deep voice. Come in. Feng Jiao came in and looked at Yi Li. He hesitated for a moment and asked, Wang Fei Prince, is he coming back? Yi Li nodded and said with a faint smile, yes, he will be back in 2 or 3 days at most. Feng Jiao's face was happy, but Yi Li's expression was still indifferent. He said with some confusion, Wang Fei Xiaoyao is coming back. Are you not happy? Yi Li looked up at him and asked, Feng San, can we hold on until Xiaoyao comes back? Feng Jiao was stunned. Wang Fei means. Yi Li sighed softly, 1,000,000 troops. How can Enchanting not know? Tomorrow. I'm afraid the Xiling army's attack will be even more intense. Feng Jiao frowned. Will Enchanting attack the city tomorrow? Yi Li said with a faint smile. If he can't take Feihong Pass before the army arrives, he will die. Fitzyu, will you fight or not? Feng Jiao's expression gradually became serious as he asked. What plans does your highness have? Yi Li reached out and handed over the letter in her hand. Feng Jiao took the letter and read it. He frowned and looked at Yi Li. Prince asked Wang Fei to leave Feihong Pass first. Wang Fei seems to. Yi Li didn't have the slightest intention to leave. Feng Jiao persuaded, since Prince has already made arrangements, Wang Fei, should we leave first? Feng Jiao understood Mo Xiao's temper. If something happened to Princess Ding, everyone would have to bear the consequences. Yi Li looked at him faintly and said, leave? Where to? Naturally back to Glass City. Feng Jiao said, Prince will arrive soon. Wang Fei will be safe as long as you leave Feihong Pass. No matter how fast Enchanting is, he can't attack Glass City, right? Feng San, Enchanting is now like a trapped beast. Do you know what will happen if he enters Feihong Pass? Yi Li asked softly. Feng Jiao was silent. Yi Li said, he will drag all the people in the northwest into a disaster. It's not because Enchanting is cruel by nature, but because he has to. At this point, Enchanting will never think of turning the tables. He will want to die together with the Mahist army. At the same time, he will also buy time for West Hill. If that's the case, then Wang Fei has to leave. Yi Li was undoubtedly the most important person to attack Mo Xiao. Feng Jiao said solemnly, Wang Fei, please rest assured. As long as Feng San is still alive, he will never let the Xiling army step into Feihong Pass. But Wang Fei, please leave Feihong Pass immediately. Yi Li looked at Feng Jiao and shook her head. Feng Jiao frowned and said worriedly, Wang Fei, please think twice. Something happens to you. Feng San. Yi Li looked at Feng Jiao and said seriously, I won't leave. As long as there is one soldier in Feihong Pass, I will never leave before them. Today I gave up the Qilin. I can tell myself that it was for the sake of the Feihong Pass. So now, why did I give up Feihong Pass and the soldiers stationed there? For my life, Yi Li. Feng San, in this world, there are always some things that are more important than life. Feng Jiao was silent. It wasn't that he didn't understand Yi Li's thoughts. In reality, if it was any other general who planned to abandon their subordinates and the place they were stationed at on the eve of a great battle, he would only hate and despise them. But Yi Li was different. Not only was she a woman, but she was the mistress of the Prince Ding mansion. She was the person Prince Ding valued the most. Perhaps in the eyes of the Mahist army, including Feng Jiao, Princess Ding was someone they needed to protect even if they had to sacrifice their lives and blood. But they did not understand that Yi Li was not only Princess Ding and Mo Xiaoyao's wife and lover. She was also a soldier. Dying on the battlefield was the fate of a soldier. Abandoning a city and fleeing was something a soldier would despise and endure for the rest of their life. Feng Jiao hesitated and finally asked, Wang Fei, are you blaming the prince? At the beginning he did not know and did not feel anything. When Feng Jiao completely understood Mo Xiaoyao's plan, Feng Jiao had a faint feeling that what the prince did this time would not be approved by Wang Fei. As a general of the Prince Ding mansion and Mo Xiaoyao's good friend, Feng Jiao did not think that Mo Xiaoyao's decision was wrong. But at the same time, as a member of the army stationed at Feihong Pass, Feng Jiao knew that from the beginning, the soldiers left at Feihong Pass were destined to be sacrificed in Mo Xiaoyao's eyes. This could not be blamed on Mo Xiaoyao. As the highest commander of the Prince Ding mansion and the Mahist army, his decision was correct and for the sake of the entire Prince Ding mansion and the Mahist army. But was this fair to the soldiers who defended Feihong Pass to the death? Without a commander, the decision to kill, the decision to give up, and in a moment's thought, the life and death of countless people. So Feng Jiao knew that he was destined to never be a true general in this life. Yili was stunned for a long time. Just when Feng Jiao thought that she would not answer, she smiled faintly, shook her head and said, "No, I understand what he means." Yili did not read so many strategic and commanding books in her previous life for nothing. When it was necessary to talk about these theories, she could even talk more incessantly than Emo Shuyao, making it irrefutable. But compared with Yili, Emo Shuyao was a real commander. His decision was definitely not wrong. The war, which was originally expected to last for at least a few years, would soon end under Emo Shuyao's operation. Then the people of the entire Central Plains would be able to enjoy peace again. Even if the number of people sacrificed was calculated, under the current situation, even if all the soldiers in Feihong Pass were killed, the number of people sacrificed was much smaller than if the war continued. But some things could be understood, but it was hard to accept. Even if it could be accepted, it was hard to do when it really happened. At least Yili could not do it. When the hundreds of thousands of soldiers of the Mo family were fighting a bloody battle for Feihong Pass, Yili could not bring herself to escape alone. Then after the war was over, she would come out to enjoy the glory of the sacrifice. At the end of the day, Yili was still a soldier, not a politician. Chapter 1027. Seeing that Feng Jiao still wanted to say something, Yili waved her hand and said, "There's no need to say any more. Unless you plan to go against your superior and knock me out. But if you really do that, I will come back on my own. Feng-san, if I escape from this battle, I will not feel at peace for the rest of my life." Feng Jiao was silent for a while before he finally sighed and said, "I understand. But, Wangfei, please take care of yourself." Yili smiled and said, "Of course, there are still people waiting for me to go back." Unable to persuade Yili, Feng Jiao could only leave helplessly. He was very clear that what Yili said was very likely to become reality. The current Enchanting had no hope of turning the tables. Even if they broke into Feihong Pass when Emo Shuyao's army arrived, they would still be quickly eliminated. Therefore, Enchanting was very likely to stake everything on one throw and wreak havoc in Feihong Pass. As the Mahist army, they could not watch as the mountains and rivers they protected turned into rivers of blood. Therefore, they could only choose to fight with the Shilling army to the last soldier. They had to delay as much time as possible so that Emo Shuyao and his army could arrive on time. Princess Ding is not willing to leave? Under the moonlight, Han Mingyue looked handsome. The faint moonlight scattered on his body, adding a different kind of tranquility. Feng Jiao sighed and shrugged. "Didn't you already guess?" Han Mingyue nodded and said, "If Princess Ding is willing to leave at this time, she would not be Princess Ding. But Shuyao, he really is not worried." Emo Shuyao only sent a letter back. How could he be so sure that Yili would do as he said? Feng Jiao smiled bitterly and said, "Didn't Prince think that the little heir is still at Feihong Pass? Even if it's not for herself, Princess Consort will leave Feihong Pass for the little heir." Han Mingyue smiled and said, "Unfortunately, he doesn't know that Princess Ding will send the little heir away in advance. Isn't that so?" Feng Jiao frowned worriedly. He looked at Han Mingyue and asked, "Why aren't you leaving?" Han Mingyue smiled indifferently and said, "I'm all alone in this world. Isn't it the same wherever I go? Tomorrow, I'll leave the princess's safety to you," Feng Jiao said solemnly. Han Mingyue raised her eyebrows and asked, "Do you trust me?" Feng Jiao raised his eyebrows and rolled his eyes at him, saying, "If I don't trust you, why would I talk nonsense with you?" Han Mingyue nodded solemnly and said, "I trust you. Thank you, Princess Consort." In the study, Qin Feng and Lin Han stood in front of the desk and said in a low voice. Both of them were injured. Qin Feng's left shoulder was still wrapped in white cloth. Lin Han didn't have any external injuries, but his pale face showed that he wasn't completely unharmed. Yili put down her brush and looked at the two with a frown, saying, "Why aren't you going to rest?" Qin Feng said in a low voice, "This subordinate requests to accompany Princess Consort to battle tomorrow." Lin Han followed and said, "This subordinate also wishes to." "Nonsense," Yili coldly reprimanded. "If you're injured, then go and recover. Do you think that you have more lives than others, or that the world won't turn without you?" Qin Feng and Lin Han looked at each other. Qin Feng stepped forward and said, "This subordinate requests Princess Consort's permission. This is not only the request of the two of us, but also the request of the 100 or so Qilin brothers who have just returned." Yili sneered and asked, "And then? You drag your injured bodies to the battlefield and then let Qilin be exterminated? The order was given by me. Even if you want to be buried with them, it's not your turn. This subordinate doesn't dare. Qin Feng and Lin Han hurriedly knelt down. Yili looked at the two quietly. After a while she sighed faintly and said, "Get up. I understand how you feel. But I hope that you also understand. The Qilin brothers who have sacrificed themselves definitely don't want to see you die with them. Instead they hope that you and all the other survivors can live well and live with them." Yili really understood how they felt. The relationship between the Qilin soldiers was deeper than that between the Mahist army and the Black Cloud cavalry. They were all elites selected from various armies. Almost all of them had experienced from the beginning that they didn't see eye to eye with each other. Later on they slowly worked together. They went through hellish training together. They carried out all kinds of difficult missions together many times. It was true that they lived and died together. This time they had sacrificed nearly 90% of their possessions. Those who survived would not feel the so-called feeling of surviving a calamity, nor would they feel as if they had escaped death. Most of them would only blame themselves for being alive. They would only feel guilty. Yili had seen a lot of examples like this. Many soldiers had experienced cruel battles. They didn't die under the enemy's swords and spears. In the end they ended their own lives. Princess, Qin Feng and Lin Han's eyes were a little red. These Qilin soldiers were carefully selected and personally trained by them. For them these soldiers were more like their brothers, students and nephews. Seeing so many people die in front of them but they couldn't do anything about it. This kind of pain was enough to make them doubt the meaning of their existence. Yili stood up and looked at the two seriously. "Go back and tell them that as long as I'm alive, I will personally bring Enchanting's head back to pay tribute to the dead soldiers. But I hope that they will all live well and continue Qilin." "Obey." Qin Feng and Lin Han stood up and said. After saying that, Qin Feng hesitated and said, "But I still want to follow you into battle. I'm not only the commander of Qilin, I'm also your bodyguard. As long as I haven't died in battle, I must stay by Princess' side and protect Princess' safety." This subordinate also has the same intention. This subordinate is a secret guard of Ding Palace. The purpose of a secret guard's existence is to protect Princess' safety. May Princess allow it? Yili looked at them awkwardly. Lin Han said, "Princess, don't worry. My injury is not a problem." Qin Feng nodded and said, "It's not a problem. It's just a flesh wound." The study was silent for a long time. Then Yili looked up and glanced at the two of them. "Since you know that there will be a tough battle tomorrow, go back and rest." "Yes, we will leave." The two of them were overjoyed. They quickly bowed to Yili and left. Sure enough, before the sun rose the next day, the sound of the Shilling army entering the palace could be heard from outside. Yili led Yuan Pei and the others to the city gate tower. Before the sun rose, they saw the Shilling army below the city gate in a black mass. They hadn't even started fighting yet, but they could already feel the overwhelming murderous aura and desire to fight. They didn't know what Enchanting had done. After yesterday's battle, the Shilling army's morale should have been low. But now they were full of murderous aura. Shilling Genom of Gojoseon, Enchanting requests to see Princess Ding. Under the city gate tower, Enchanting didn't hide at the back of the army this time. Instead he rode his horse and stood at the front. He looked up at the people on the city gate tower. Even the bodyguards he usually had with him were nowhere to be seen. It was as if Enchanting didn't care about his life at all. Even if the Mahist army on the city gate tower suddenly shot arrows at him, he didn't care. Chapter 1028. Yili was slightly startled. She took a step forward and revealed herself between the two battlements. She said lightly, "Yili is here. What does Genom of Gojoseon have to say to me?" Enchanting smiled faintly, "Nothing much. I just have some questions that I want to talk to Princess Ding alone. I originally wanted to talk to Prince Ding, but it seems that I won't have the chance now. Since things have come to this, does Genom of Gojoseon think that there is anything else to talk about?" Enchanting waved his hand indifferently, "I don't care. It's just that some things are uncomfortable if you don't talk about it." Yili frowned. Feng Jiao and the others beside her quickly advised, "Princess, don't talk nonsense with him." Yili knew that talking to Enchanting in private would not do any harm to the Mahist army. At least it could delay for a while. No matter how long it would take for the generals guarding Feihong Pass, the longer they delayed the better it would be for them. Under the city wall, Lei Zhenting looked at Yi Li and smiled. If Princess is worried, I can enter the city alone to talk to Princess. No need. Yi Li smiled faintly. She jumped down from the city wall and landed beside the city gate. She looked at Lei Zhenting and said, Genom of Gojoseon, if you have anything to say, you can come over and talk. The moment Yi Li landed, Zhuojing, Qin Feng and Lin Han, who were beside Yi Li, also jumped down. They formed a triangle and blocked Yi Li behind them. On the city wall, the Black Cloud Cavalry's bows and arrows were aimed at the city wall. As long as Lei Zhenting made any strange movements, regardless of whether he succeeded or not, the Black Cloud Cavalry's arrows would turn him into a porcupine. With Qin Feng and the others standing in front of Yi Li, the chances of Lei Zhenting landing a hit were infinitely close to zero. Lei Zhenting smiled calmly and urged his horse forward. Prince, no. The generals behind Lei Zhenting also tried to stop him. They were not the only ones who were worried about the Prince Ding mansion. Lei Zhenting waved his sleeves, indicating that there was no need to say anything more. Then he walked down the city gate tower alone. Lei Zhenting stopped a few steps away from Yi Li. He did not mind the covetous eyes of Qin Feng and the others. After looking at Yi Li for a long time, he sighed regretfully and said, I can be said to have wandered unhindered in my life and rarely met a worthy opponent. However, I always lost at the hands of the Prince Ding mansion. All these years I have been thinking about why this is so. I have also been thinking of ways to defeat Immerse. But now, it is clear that I have failed. Yi Li was indifferent and did not speak. She knew that Lei Zhenting only wanted to say something and did not really want her to answer. As expected, Lei Zhenting did not mind her silence and continued, now that we have reached this point, I finally understand. From the moment Shi Ling, De Chu State and the Northern Militant Alliance formed, they had already fallen into Mo Xiao's trap. I boasted of my intelligence, but I also knew that I was far from being able to calculate to this extent. I think, even young Master Qing Qin, who is the most intelligent person in the world, would not be able to scheme to this extent. Prince Ding Mo Xiao is truly outstandingly scheming. Wang Fei, don't you think so? Yi Li smiled faintly and said, if Genom of Gojoseon is like him and one day suddenly falls from a high place to the dust, you will also be like him, suppressing and enduring all your feelings and pain. You will also have to face your enemies calmly. Perhaps, Genom of Gojoseon will be able to understand why he is able to do all this. Not to mention Lei Zhenting, even Yi Li was often shocked by Mo Xiao's arrangements and schemes. If Mo Xiao was not willing to speak, Yi Li believed that he definitely had the ability to keep everyone in the dark even after he ruled the world. Wang Fei is right. Lei Zhenting had to admit that Yi Li was right. Lei Zhenting was a true genius. In his life, other than the hatred of Mo Liufeng's broken arm, he had not suffered any setbacks. Whatever he wanted to do, he was always able to do it. Except for matters related to the Prince Ding mansion. Lei Zhenting looked at the calm Yi Li, his eyes filled with admiration and amazement. In the current situation, the Xiling army's ending was not worth mentioning. At least in front of him, the Xiling army definitely had the ability to break through Feihong Pass in 4 hours. Feihong Pass, the Mahist army stationed there, and even Yi Li's ending was almost foreseeable. Even in such a situation, to be able to remain so calm, even a man would not be able to do it. The woman in front of him was indeed worthy of the respect and admiration of all the men in the world. I originally thought that Wang Fei would leave Feihong Pass last night, Lei Zhenting said. Yi Li said in a low voice, I am not only the Wang Fei of the Prince Ding mansion, but also a member of the Mahist army. The Mahist army does not have soldiers who run away without fighting. Lei Zhenting nodded and praised, good courage. Although I have said it more than once, I still want to say it. The luckiest thing in Prince Ding's life should be to marry such an outstanding Wang Fei. Speaking of this, Lei Zhenting also felt a little regretful. Why did he not bring this woman to West Hill by hook or by crook? What made Lei Zhenting feel even more regretful was why such a woman had to be Princess Ding. Could it be that the heavens did not destroy the Prince Ding mansion? Yi Li smiled faintly and said, the luckiest thing in Yi Li's life is to marry Prince Ding. Princess Ding, do you know what I will do once the West Hill army enters the pass? Lei Zhenting asked in a low voice. Yi Li said calmly, no matter what Genom of Gojoseon wants to do, he has to go through me first. Lei Zhenting could not help but smile and said, It seems that Wang Fei has already guessed it. Wang Fei does not seem to have any intention of compromising. Yi Li looked down and said, "At this point both sides. Is there any room for compromise?" At this point, it was destined to be a life-and-death struggle. Lei Jinting praised, "That's right. In that case, let I see how tenacious the Mahist army is. In addition, I also want to see, when Prince Ding loses his love forever, will he still have the mind to scheme like this? I bid farewell, Wang Fei, take care." As if he had finished speaking, Lei Jinting nodded at Yi Li and pulled the reins to return to his army. Yi Li nodded, likewise. Chapter 1029. 100 miles away from Feihong Pass, the Mahist army was marching towards Feihong Pass with a black flag. Mo Xiuyao rode his horse at the front of the group. His snow-white hair made him look even colder than before. Although he had just wiped out a group of West Hill soldiers, Mo Xiuyao's brows were still furrowed. "Greetings to Prince." A fast horse came from the direction of Feihong Pass and stopped in front of Mo Xiuyao. He did not even have time to get off the horse and saluted directly on the horse's back. Seeing him rushing over, Mo Xiuyao's heart sank. He said, "No need to be so courteous. How is Feihong Pass?" The man said in a low voice, "I am incompetent. Princess refuses to leave Feihong Pass." "What did you say?" Mo Xiuyao's handsome face suddenly became as cold as iron. The anger in his eyes was clear. The man said, "There was a fierce battle at Feihong Pass yesterday. Almost half of the soldiers stationed there were killed. In addition, the 6 Qilin troops that were left at Feihong Pass were almost completely wiped out. Her Highness refused to leave Feihong Pass first." Mo Xiuyao narrowed his eyes and asked coldly, "What about the little heir?" The man said, "A few days ago Her Highness sent the little heir back to Glass City." After listening to the Shadow Guard's report, Mo Xiuyao's face became very serious. After a while he said sternly, "Black Cloud Cavalry, follow I first. We must reach Feihong Pass before noon today." The Black Cloud Cavalry soldiers following Mo Xiuyao answered in unison. Mo Xiuyao told Ling Huai and He Su to be in charge of the soldiers behind. He then led the 30,000 Black Cloud Cavalry towards Feihong Pass. The conversation did not last long. When Yi Li returned to the tower, Feng San and the others who were waiting could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. They were actually worried that Lei Jinting would act out of desperation and harm Yi Li. Yi Li didn't relax at all when she saw how relaxed everyone was. She didn't understand why Lei Jinting had specifically looked for her to say those words. However, he understood Lei Jinting's determination to break through Feihong Pass and his future plans. Therefore, their true difficulty had yet to come. This time Lei Jinting did not show any mercy. Hundreds of thousands of Xiling army continued their relentless attacks. The remaining 100,000 Mahist army could not go out of the city to fight and could only defend the city walls. However, the difference in numbers between the two sides was too great. Moreover, the Mahist army's soldiers had been fighting hard for days and could be said to be extremely tired. On the other hand, the Xiling army had many soldiers and horses and could take turns to fight, so they were not very tired. Under such circumstances, when it was almost noon, the Mahist army at Feihong Pass was faintly unable to hold on. But even so, it still far exceeded Lei Jinting's plan of breaking through Feihong Pass in 4 hours. Soon, a West Hill soldier climbed up the gate tower of Feihong Pass, followed by a second and a third. Although many of them were cut down by the soldiers guarding the gate, more and more West Hill soldiers climbed up the gate tower. Therefore, the fighting that was originally only under the tower and on the battlements began to shift to the top of the tower. Yi Li slashed the throat of a West Hill soldier with a knife. Just as she was about to turn around, a knife flashed behind her. Yi Li quickly raised her hand to block but was even pulled to the side. The West Hill soldier who was waving the knife with a ferocious face fell to the ground. Han Mingyue stood behind Yi Li. She was still dressed in snow-white clothes and looked elegant. "Why haven't you left?" Seeing Han Mingyue, Yi Li frowned slightly and asked. They had the responsibility of guarding the city and had to stay. But Han Mingyue did not have any position in the Mahist army and naturally had no obligations. Also, Han Mingxi had been sent back to Glass City by her in the name of official business. Han Mingyue had even less reason to stay here. Han Mingyue smiled faintly and said, "I want to see how far Wang Fei and the Mahist army can go." Yi Li smiled helplessly and said, You see it now. I can't take it. Yili felt helpless and lost. She had persisted for so many days, but in the end this was the result. More importantly, their failure did not just mean failure but also the price of failure. Once Lei Jinting led his troops into the pass, the consequences would be unimaginable. Does Wang Fei regret? Han Mingyue asked curiously. Yili shook her head and said, I only do what I should do. Also, no matter what the result is, what has happened cannot be changed. What is the use of regret? Looking at her calm and composed appearance, Han Mingyue suddenly felt her emotions calm down a lot. She smiled and said, the reason I stayed is because I feel that maybe a miracle will happen. I hope so. Yili smiled faintly. Clearly she did not take his words seriously. There were many miracles in this world, but it was clear that this miracle did not happen on their side. When everyone saw Lei Jinting, who should have been seriously injured, fly up the tower of Feihong Pass with great qinggong, they could not help but feel shocked. At the same time they rejoiced. Fortunately, when Wang Fei went down, Lei Jinting did not make a sneak attack. Otherwise, with just Qin Feng and the others, they may not be able to stop him. Lei Jinting stood leisurely on the tower facing Yili. At this time there was a river of blood on the tower. But people with discerning eyes knew that no matter how brave and good the Mahist army was, when the enemy was several times their number, failure was almost inevitable. Lei Jinting looked at Yili with a smile and said, Is Wang Fei wondering why I did not attack at the tower? Yili shook her head and said, Compared to this, I am more curious. How did Genom of Gojoseon recover in such a short time? No one knew Lei Jinting's injury better than Yili. Due to the improper treatment of the West Hills military doctors, Lei Jinting's injury would only be more serious than she had expected. Han Mingyue stood beside Yili and smiled gently. This is not strange. This one remembers that there is a method that can increase a person's potential in the shortest amount of time. Even if the person is seriously injured, they can exert more power in a short time. Lei Jinting looked coolly at Han Mingyue and said, Master Mingyue is indeed experienced and knowledgeable. Han Mingyue took a step forward and stood in front of Yili without a trace. He sighed and said, I would rather not know. There was nothing in the world that did not have a price. The method that Han Mingyue spoke of was so heaven-defying, then the price that had to be paid was self-evident. Lei Jinting would do such a thing. It was clear that he did not plan on living. A martial arts master might not be scary, but a martial arts master who did not want to live was definitely scary. Looking at the proud Lei Jinting, Han Mingyue shook her head and said, Genom of Gojoseon is also a hero. Why do you have to take things so hard? Lei Jinting was not angry. There was not even a trace of emotion. At this point it could be said that he had reached the end of the road. Although he did not understand how he had been tricked by Mo Shuyao, he had lost. It was not that he did not have the courage to admit defeat. But before this he could still do something for the West Hill, or he could still stab Mo Shuyao viciously. Chapter 1030. Genom of Gojoseon should know Mo Shuyao's temper. Something happens to Princess Ding. Your hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Han Mingyue reminded him faintly. Lei Jinting smiled and nodded, saying, Many thanks for young Master Mingyu's reminder, but, from the moment they followed I to attack Fei Hong Pass, they didn't plan on living. So, I'm afraid I cannot accept young Master Mingyu's kindness. Han Mingyue sighed. If he could, he really didn't want to fight with Lei Jinting. With his martial arts, in another 10 years he might be able to fight Lei Jinting to a draw. But right now there was nothing he could do. Also, the reversal method that Lei Jinting used was a method that could gather all the power in one's body in a short amount of time. In this situation, in 24 hours, Lei Jinting's power was twice as strong as usual. Not just him, even if Mo Shuyao came personally it would be difficult. Lei Jinting examined Yili, who was standing next to Han Mingyue. He asked curiously, Wang Fei really doesn't blame Mo Shuyao at all? Yili raised her eyes and frowned slightly. This Fei doesn't understand Genom of Gojoseon's meaning. Lei Jinting laughed loudly and said, Wang Fei is a smart person. How can you not understand I's meaning? If it wasn't for Mo Shuyao's scheme, the 200,000 soldiers guarding Fei Hong Pass and Wang Fei's Qilin would not have been trapped by I at Fei Hong Pass. Now they are about to be completely wiped out. Does Wang Fei not have any resentment in your heart? Yili lowered her eyes and thought for a moment before saying faintly, This Fei is not good at making choices, but I know what it means to win the biggest victory with the smallest price. From the standpoint of the Prince Ding mansion, his decision is only beneficial. Why should this Fei have any resentment? Lei Jinting examined Yili for a moment. In the end he could only sigh helplessly. I was thinking, never mind, if Wang Fei had the same thoughts as other women, then she wouldn't be Princess Ding. Wang Fei. I have offended you. Finishing, Lei Jinting did not waste words. His gaze towards Yili was instantly filled with murderous intent, and an oppressive aura pressed towards Yili. Lei Jinting was not a person that liked to waste words. The reason that he had said so much to Yili was because he was certain that Mo Shuyao could not return so quickly. Also, he wanted to sow discord between Mo Shuyao and Yili. If Princess Ding died with resentment towards Prince Ding, what kind of blow would that be to Prince Ding, who loved his wife as much as his life? It was a pity that Yi Li's mind was unexpectedly tenacious and steady. He was not moved by him at all. Lei Jinting had no choice but to give up his plan with some regret. Without Lei Jinting speaking, Yi Li and the others knew that the present situation was unavoidable. Yi Li calmly took out 2 pistols, one on the left and one on the right. She pointed them at Lei Jinting. Lei Jinting looked curiously at the thing in her hand. "This is the thing that injured I?" Yi Li said with a faint smile. "Prince, you can try again." Before she finished speaking, there were 2 loud bangs. 2 bullets had already shot towards Lei Jinting. Lei Jinting's figure flashed and he quickly dodged. The 2 shots missed, but Yi Li was not dispirited. She calmly continued to chase after Lei Jinting's figure. The pistols in her hand made loud bangs. The speed of the bullets was very fast, but Lei Jinting's speed seemed to be even faster. Everyone could only see a shadow moving freely on the city wall. When Yi Li stopped, Lei Jinting had reappeared on a battlement on the city wall. He lowered his head to look at the battle robe behind him. It was unknown when a small hole had appeared on the battle robe. Lei Jinting couldn't help but praise, "Good stuff. It's a pity. If there were more of these things, I might have to be a bit more cautious. However, it seems that princess doesn't have many." Yi Li didn't hide it and nodded. "That's right. This consort only has 2 of them. Originally, I didn't expect to use them to deal with Genom of Gojoseon. She just wanted to see Lei Jinting's current strength. Now they saw that Lei Jinting's current strength was probably above Mo Shuyao and Ling Taihan." Lei Jinting nodded and smiled. Since Princess Ding has already made a move, now it's Ai's turn. After saying this, Lei Jinting unsheathed the sword in his hand and swung it towards Yi Li's direction. Lei Jinting's move was very simple and ordinary without any fancy moves. However, everyone present could feel the murderous aura and terrifying power within it. Han Mingyue's expression changed. At the same time, she unsheathed the sword in her hand and slashed towards Lei Jinting's sword aura. Qin Feng, Zhuijing, Wei Lin and the others beside Yi Li also moved at the same time, wanting to block Lei Jinting's attack. Yi Li dodged to the side. After the battle with Ling Taihan, Yi Li already understood that when facing a true master of internal energy, she didn't have any advantage. The reason why she hadn't encountered any danger before was because she had never met masters of the same level as Lei Jinting and Ling Taihan. Yi Li took a deep breath and looked back at the Mahist army and the West Hill soldiers who were still fighting not far away. At this time the 2 sides were already fighting face to face. It was a fight to the death. At this time, Lei Jinting's power was not something that Han Mingyue and the others could resist. Almost at the cost of burning his life, Lei Jinting's martial arts cultivation suddenly reached the peak of his life. With one blow, Han Mingyue and Zhuijing were sent flying more than 10 steps away. Qin Feng and Wei Lin hit the city wall and both spat out a mouthful of blood. Lei Jinting knocked down Han Mingyue and the other 3 with one blow and then ignored them. He directly slashed his sword at Yi Li. Yi Li hurriedly retreated a few steps. Then Lei Jinting's sword aura followed her like a shadow. Seeing that there was no way out, Yi Li gritted her teeth and a cold light flashed in her hand. Instead of retreating, she rushed towards Lei Jinting. A smile flashed across Lei Jinting's lips. It was as if he was mocking Yi Li for overestimating herself. At the top of the city, a cold light flashed. In an instant, it attacked Lei Jinting as fast as lightning. Feeling the threat of a master of the same level, Lei Jinting immediately gave up on Yi Li and raised his hand to block the opponent's attack. Not far away, a figure in blue clothes stood on the city wall behind Yi Li. The person looked at Lei Jinting coldly and said, "Since when did Genom of Gojoseon like to bully the weak?" Since you want to fight, why don't you come to me? Yili dodged Lei Jinting's sword and panted slightly. She retreated to one side and left the battlefield to Ling Taihan. Lei Jinting looked regretfully at Yili, who had already retreated to Han Mingyue and the others. He looked at Ling Taihan and said, "You really know how to pick the right time." Ling Taihan said indifferently, "Didn't you ask me to come to you?" Lei Jinting frowned and said, "You can't possibly get here so quickly." According to his calculations, he should have finished dealing with everything by the time Ling Taihan arrived. Ling Taihan hugged his sword and said, "It is indeed impossible. But a few days ago someone told me that if I didn't feel it sooner, I might not be able to see you. Now it seems that he wasn't wrong." Lei Jinting's current appearance was very strong, but it was only for the next 48 hours. After 48 hours, not only would he lose all his martial arts, but he would also lose his life. Lei Jinting was also a first-class master in the world. Naturally, he would not understand the reason for Lei Jinting's current situation. Mo Shuyao again. He can even calculate such a situation? Lei Jinting frowned. Ling Taihan did not hide and nodded. "Yes, I saw him 10 days ago. But he told me that Genom of Gojoseon would definitely lose his life in 10 days. If he wanted to find you, it would be best to do it before 10 days. So, I arrived at Feihong Pass 2 days ago. I didn't expect to see a good show at that time." Lei Jinting naturally understood what he meant by a good show. However, at his level there was nothing to be angry about. He shook the long sword in his hand and said, "In that case, let's do it. After killing you, we can still deal with Princess Ding. At this point, there is no difference whether I is here or not." The soldiers of West Hill had already received his orders. Once they attacked Feihong Pass, they did not need to care about anything. They just needed to destroy the entire northwest as much as possible. When these soldiers and horses scattered all over the northwest, even if Mo Xuyao's million-strong army came back, it would still be a headache. Under such circumstances, it was not that important whether Lei Jinting was here or not. Ling Taihan nodded solemnly and said, "That's good. The grudges between us should have been settled long ago. If I die in your hands in this battle, it means that I am not as good as you. If you lose, I promise that I will not find trouble with Lei Tingfeng." Lei Jinting smiled with satisfaction and said, "In that case, I will take advantage of you. Please. Please. Princess." Qin Feng pressed on his throbbing wound with one hand and looked at the two people facing each other on the city wall. Especially when he looked at Ling Taihan, his gaze was even more complicated. Who would have thought that the one who saved the princess's life this time was Ling Taihan, who had almost killed the princess back then? They did not expect that the prince had secretly arranged such a move. If Ling Taihan had not arrived in time, it would have been difficult for them to save the princess from Lei Jinting with their martial arts. Yili nodded and said in a low voice, "Don't worry about them. Stop the West Hill soldiers from entering the pass at all costs." Qin Feng and the others nodded in unison and said, "We obey." Chapter 1031. The great battle on top of the city gate tower should have attracted countless martial artists to come and watch. But at this time in Feihong Pass, no one had the time to care about this. Whether it was the West Hill soldiers who were eager to rush into the pass, or the Mahist army soldiers who were desperately resisting the enemy, no one was in the mood to watch this great battle. In everyone's heart there was only one goal, and that was the enemy. The city gate was finally broken by the heavy giant wood. The Mahist army soldiers blocked the gate with their flesh and blood and fought with the enemy. On the city gate tower, on the streets, the soldiers of the two armies could be seen fighting everywhere. Whether it was the imminent death of Genom of Gojoseon or Princess Ding's willingness to live and die with the soldiers guarding the city, it greatly stimulated the morale of the soldiers of the two armies. No one was willing to take half a step back, and they fought a bloody battle. No one knew how long this bloody battle lasted. Almost everyone, including Yili, was covered in blood. When they were exhausted, they finally heard the sound of horse hooves coming from outside the pass. Feng Jiao was shocked. He suddenly jumped up and shouted, "The Black Cloud Cavalry is here. The prince is back." Suddenly, all the soldiers who were lucky enough to survive were shocked. Especially when they heard the sound of horse hooves gradually approaching, everyone's heart surged with an uncontrollable joy. The prince was finally back. The reinforcements were finally here. They had finally defended Feihong Pass. With the arrival of the Black Cloud Cavalry, The pressure on the guards at the city gate suddenly decreased a lot. The Shilling army that was still outside the city could not help but be confused because of this sudden change. The Black Cloud cavalry took advantage of the gap and rushed directly into the city. The rider at the front of the Black Cloud cavalry was wearing white clothes and had white hair. He had an awe-inspiring aura. Close the front and back gates. Although Feihong Pass was called a pass, there was still a small city inside the pass. However, this city was not big and most of the people living in it were soldiers who were stationed here. There were very few ordinary people. Because of the impending war, the civilians had already retreated to the rear. At this moment the city was filled with Mahist army soldiers. Once the city gates were closed, the West Hill soldiers who had not yet entered the city would naturally have to expend effort to attack again, while the West Hill soldiers who had already entered the city would be trapped in the city. Li Li. Li Li. Emo Shuyao urged his horse to gallop through the streets. A few West Hill soldiers who were foolish enough to try to sneak up on them were whipped a few dozen feet away. Finally, he saw the slender figure at a corner of the street. Her white robes had already been stained with blood. Even from afar, one could still see that her beautiful face was also stained with blood. In that instant, Emo Shuyao felt as if his heart had been whipped by a whip. It was so painful that it felt like it was being torn apart. Shuyao. Suddenly hearing Emo Shuyao's figure, Yili panicked for a moment. She had already lost count of how many people she had killed today. Her entire person seemed to emit a thick stench of blood. At this moment, suddenly hearing Emo Shuyao's voice for a moment, she only felt that it was both real and illusory. Careful! Han Mingyue shouted in a low voice. She threw the sword in her hand at the West Hill soldiers behind Yili who were preparing to sneak up on her. At the same time, Emo Shuyao leapt from his horse. Like a swan crossing water, he leapt in front of Yili and raised his hand to pull her into his embrace. Shuyao. Yili was startled. Only now did she clearly see the person hugging her. Emo Shuyao tightly held the person in his arms. For the first time in his life he felt incomparable fear. Emo Shuyao was a person who could take every conceivable possibility into account. Everyone in the world could be played in the palm of his hand. But this time he had really miscalculated. He could not imagine what he would do if something really happened to Yili. Emo Shuyao held Yili with one hand and waved the horsewhip in his other hand. Streams of energy shot out in all directions like poisonous arrows. For a moment, not a single West Hill soldier within 100 feet of them was spared. The West Hill soldiers in the distance did not dare to come forward because of Prince Ding's reputation. Han Mingyue drew her sword from the body of the fallen West Hill soldier. She stepped forward and said, "You're finally back." Emo Shuyao nodded. For the first time in more than 10 years he looked at Han Mingyue with such seriousness. In a low voice he said, "Thank you." Like Yili, Han Mingyue was also covered in blood. The image of an elegant gentleman no longer existed. Moreover, Han Mingyue had many wounds on her body. It was clear that Han Mingyue had always been by Yili's side to protect him. Han Mingyue smiled faintly, even though her face was still stained with the blood of the enemy. The smile in her eyes had some of the warmth of the moonlight breeze and the elegant demeanor of the famous Master Mingyu of the past. Han Mingyue knew that after this battle, the estrangement between them for so many years could be completely resolved. Han Mingyue understood Emo Shuyao's character well enough. Emo Shuyao would not hate him. He would only ignore him forever. He would treat him as if he had never had a friend and brother. When she walked out of the fog of infatuation, Han Mingyue finally realized what she had lost for this hopeless relationship. Emo Shuyao's return naturally caused a big commotion. After a while, Feng Jiao and the others also rushed over. Feng Jiao did not have time to exchange pleasantries. He hurriedly asked Emo Shuyao, "How many people did you bring back?" Emo Shuyao said, 30,000. Feng Jiao's face suddenly became very ugly. There were hundreds of thousands of West Hill soldiers. 30,000 people were useless. Emo Shuyao said calmly, "Don't worry. Leng Huai will bring people here soon. We just need to delay the West Hill people as much as possible and block them in the Feihong Pass and the small town." At this point there was nothing more to say. Feng Jiao also directly turned around, "I know. But I don't know how much time we can delay. What if someone breaks out?" Emo Shuyao frowned and said, "There are soldiers stationed in every county. Although there are not many, it is enough to block some of the remaining soldiers." Yili said lightly, I have ordered all the people within 100 miles of the Feihong Pass to fight to the death and retreat. Hearing this, everyone was happy. Except for Yi Li and the others, no one had thought of this idea. Although it was not easy to make all the people retreat with the prestige of the Prince Ding mansion, as long as Princess Ding personally gave the order, at least 80 to 90% of the people would retreat. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief after solving the problem they were most worried about. Feng Jiao said with a smile, "In this case, we will do our best to stop the Xiling army. We will definitely be able to hold on until General Leng arrives. Princess Consort, I will take my leave." As long as the people did not suffer heavy casualties, even if some houses and crops were destroyed, it would not be a particularly big loss for the Mahist army. Although they had been fighting for years, the foundation of the entire Northwest was not damaged because of these years of planning and development. "I will take my leave," everyone said in unison. They all turned around and rushed to their respective battlefields. By the way, Lei Jinting and Tower Master Ling are still on the tower. Yili just remembered. But she herself was not sure how much time had passed in this fierce battle. But Lei Jinting did not appear again. If the two were not still fighting, or if Lei Jinting had died in battle, then the two of them had died together. You're tuning in to the Biao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.